Hello, everyone. I am so sorry for that, terrible, terrible attempt at a Saturday Night Live cold open. It's like the anti-cold open where, you don't even say anything or look there. You think you're just minding your own business. We are having some technical difficulties that I believe have been resolved now. I was actually texting, just firing everyone involved. So, no. We're all good now. I apologize very much for that slight hiccup, but we wanted to make sure we got it right because it is a big night in conservative politics and in Canadian politics right now. The United Conservative Party in Alberta is electing a new leader, which means it's electing the next premier of Alberta. Very big. The stakes are quite high here. I'm joined by my colleague from True North, William McBeath, and also in Calgary at the UCP Leadership Results headquarters, Rachel Emmanuel, who is our Alberta reporter, and we'll throw to her as soon as we have some information on the ground there. But I do want to just give you a brief primer of what's happening here. This race has been delayed. The results, rather, have been delayed by 2 hours for issues that we haven't quite heard the scope of. But basically, the party said they had a lot of ballots. They needed more time. People could be voting in person today. So that was part of it here. Let me just ask you generally, William, why do conservative parties in particular even bother telling us timeframes? It seems like they get this wrong more often than they get it right as far as keeping these things tight and on schedule for results.
I mean, I don't think they obviously set out with the intent to keep us all waiting. What we see is only a fraction of the work that has to go into successfully executing something this big. I mean, if you think about it, they had a lot of mail-in ballots. I think something like 90,000 were mailed in from one end of the province to the other. They also had 4 or 5 in-person voting stations set up that were taking ballots this morning. And to logistically get that all together, it's obviously quite the challenge. But I think we're all quite excited about the announcement that's going to happen about who could become Alberta's next premier and the challenges that individual will face with less than a year. In fact, I think just really about 6 or 7 months until the next provincial election.
Yeah, I think that is actually quite a significant thing here. And I want to bring in Rachel Emmanuel in Calgary if she is ready to get her take on this. But I'll ask you in the meantime, William, because this is a fairly young party. The UCP was born largely because of Jason Kenney's efforts in the Unite the Right movement, uniting the PCs and the Wild Rose Party. And I don't think anyone imagined that he would be out the door so quickly, not even through his first term as premier. So what do you think this says in general about the UCP experiment and about Jason Kenney and about Alberta?
Well, I think you're certainly quite right, Andrew. I mean, if you had looked at election night a few years ago when the United Conservative Party won a very strong majority government, it ended the one-term premiership or government of Rachel Notley and the New Democrats, Alberta's only New Democrat government. And Jason Kenney looked like he was a political juggernaut in Alberta politics. And of course, before being a premier, he had been a Harper cabinet minister and an MP for years and years and years. So for him to have faltered or to encounter the kind of problems he did, I think paints a picture of just how hard it is to be premier of Alberta these days. And certainly the fact that we've had so many premiers over the past 6 or 7 years reflects the fact that keeping this job for more than one term has become very difficult.
One of the big challenges, I think, and this certainly weighs heavily in any leadership race, is that you've got in Alberta more than anywhere else a province that you can easily say is a conservative province. It's an inherently conservative province. There are a lot of conservatives and libertarians in the general population. The Overton window is much further to the right than, say, in British Columbia or Ontario. So I think people expect a lot more as a result from the Conservative Party in Alberta, whichever party that is at whichever stage in its history.
No, you're certainly right. And it poses a real challenge, I think, for anybody who steps in as premier and leader of a party to try and meet the expectations that Albertans have for what they want to see out of a conservative government. And, even the vaunted premiers, conservative premiers of the past, I think, for example, of Ralph Klein, he was actually pushed out of his position as premier because people thought he had maybe started to rest too much on his laurels or wasn't really advancing on some of the major issues that people wanted to see. And, you know, I would say here in Alberta, it's things like changing the healthcare model. What, you know, is there room to have something other than a one-size-fits-all public system? And if any innovation is going to happen on some of these policy areas, I think people expect it to come from Alberta. And certainly that's an expectation I think that United Conservative Party members have and other small C conservatives have across the province. They want to see real change and innovation, not, you know, more of the status quo or moving along at a snail's pace when it comes to building policy.
I want to check in with Rachel Emmanuel, True North's Alberta reporter, who is in Calgary right now at the live results show. Rachel, what's the plan for tonight? What's happening? Oh, I'm not hearing Rachel's audio. All right, we're not getting Rachel's audio, so we'll get that sorted out in a moment. Again, I apologize for the technical issues here, but at the same time, we are a bootstraps operation, so we will get this to you as soon as we can. Let's just talk about the road forward here, William, because obviously there's been a lot of confusion about the, I don't even want to say confusion, but a lot of conflict in the race about the Sovereignty Act. This was Danielle Smith's flagship policy, and it really became, I think, the punching bag that everyone in the race really started to take their swings at. And I'm wondering, it's not a fait accompli, of course, but if Danielle Smith is the leader, and if this is, as she promises, Bill 1 under the Danielle Smith government, a lot of these people that were railing against this bill will have to support it, will they not? So how does the unity question work after a race like this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that will be probably, if it is Danielle Smith who's elected tonight, that will be a big challenge she has, is uniting her caucus, her new caucus, of which she is not yet a member. She doesn't have a seat in the Alberta legislature. So she would have to spend an awful lot of time making sure that caucus got on board with what she's been proposing. And given how many of the leadership candidates came out very strongly against her signature policy, that unity is going to pose quite a challenge for her. And caucus unity has been the what is spelled the death knell for so many Alberta conservative leaders. If you think back to...
Well, including Jason Kenney. I mean, part of the reason we're here.
Exactly. But the reason we're all here tonight is because he couldn't keep his caucus united and together. And then before him, Alison Redford was pushed out by a caucus revolt. Ed Stelmach really had to step down as premier because of a caucus revolt. And of course, at one point, Danielle Smith faced a very famous caucus revolt. So the question will be, has she learned from some of these things in the past? Has she learned from Alberta's political history? And can she avoid repeating some of the mistakes that have been made by so many who came before her?
Yeah, very well said. I think we have the feed set up with Rachel Emmanuel again. Apologies for the delay. Never want to deprive the people of Rachel. Rachel, tell me what the mood on the ground there is right now. What's happening?
People are just sort of slowly trickling in. I think everyone, as William mentioned, we've seen the polling. People are expecting a Smith victory tonight. The question is really, is she going to take it on the first ballot? Is she going to take it later on? But people are excited for the results tonight. As you mentioned, it is a historic vote. It's one of those rare occasions when you're not just voting for the leader of a party, but you're also voting for the premier. So certainly an electric feeling in the room tonight. It's been a couple years since we've been able to do these types of events, and we're getting back into them now after COVID, but people are happy to be here today and excited to see who's going to be the new premier of Alberta.
You've been covering this race. You've been keeping in touch with the campaigns and the candidates. Has there been like one defining issue of the race apart from the Alberta Sovereignty Act that everyone's tried to, get their piece of, either it's Danielle Smith pushing it or the others beating up on it? Has there been like one other issue that's really been dominating here?
Yeah, as you mentioned, of course, there's been so much discussion about the Alberta Sovereignty Act. It has been one of the defining issues. But besides that, I think one of the defining issues has really just been COVID-19 and the way that it's impacted Albertans and the way they want their government to change going forward. Danielle Smith has positioned herself as an anti-establishment candidate who's not afraid to shake things up. So we've seen that come forward with her promises, for example, to never lock down Alberta again, to resist federal pressure to do so, to never mandate vaccines, and to change legislation so that it becomes illegal to mandate vaccines going forward. As well, another issue that I've heard brought up at every single campaign rally that I've attended across the province is AHS, Alberta Health Services. Albertans are absolutely not happy with the way that AHS operated throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. And, we've even heard some complaints from the Kenney government from it, that they asked for intensive care unit beds to be built. Those beds were not built during the pandemic. And of course, fighting against Ottawa, there's a lot of Albertans who are not happy with Kenney's record on getting a fair deal from Ottawa. And we've heard a lot of discussion about that throughout the leadership race. So I would say those three things are sort of the defining topics throughout the UCP leadership race.
You've got, as you just mentioned, Danielle Smith, who's been running as in a lot of ways the anti-Kenney. Brian Jean, one of the reasons he got back into politics was to take aim at Kenney. Todd Lawton, a former UCP MLA, kicked out of caucus and now running for leadership. And then you've also got people like, for example, Travis Taves, who was the finance minister, Rebecca Schultz, who was the children's services minister, very key Kenney allies. So has this race really been split into the anti-Kenney candidates and the Kenney continuity candidates, for lack of a better term?
It sort of has, but I would say the split isn't quite as you just mentioned. I've sort of seen people pairing Todd Lawton and Danielle Smith together. A lot of people are saying, vote Todd or Danielle 1 and 2nd. I haven't heard a lot of commentary about Brian Jean fitting into an anti-establishment candidate, although he has been very critical of Jason Kenney. And as you mentioned, he even got into politics because he said he wanted to see a change in the premiership. We've also seen efforts from some of the candidates to distance themselves from their record while they were in Kenney's cabinet. Of course, Travis Taves, he sort of hinted at it. He said, I can't talk about what happened in those private COVID discussions, but, I'm a farmer from rural Alberta, and you can only imagine that I was speaking up for rural Albertans when we were talking about lockdown. So, he won't come out and say what he said during the committee meetings because he doesn't want to break cabinet confidence, but he sort of, pushed people in that direction. He's alluded to it. And of course, as well with Rebecca Schultz, we've seen her say, I'm not from the boys club. I might have been, in Kenney's cabinet, but I was never part of the inner circle. I was never part of the boys club. So certainly they've all done their part to distance themselves from Kenney's record. I think they all know it is a tough record to be up against right now because he is so low in the polls. But I would say a lot of them haven't done so successfully.
We just came off the federal conservative leadership race. We did a show much like this one there. Are you seeing parallels between the two races, or are the dynamics just completely different?
I am seeing parallels in the two races in the sense that Pierre Poilievre was sort of the obvious front runner and people were pretty sure he was going to take the victory. Of course, he won by a landslide victory, even surpassing Stephen Harper's numbers when he won the conservative leadership victory. And we really saw for the first time that conservatives were able to rally around someone. Now, of course, here in Alberta, Poilievre made some campaign stops. I went to those stops. There was thousands of people there. Now, of course, when we're looking at provincial politics, we're dealing with, less people are going to be engaged in provincial politics a lot of times. And certainly that was the case. But I saw huge crowds rally around Danielle Smith throughout the campaign. She was pulling crowds in the hundreds. I just didn't see that with some of the other candidates. It wasn't at least a consistent thing for them where they were pulling crowds in the hundreds. But as I mentioned before, I think the main question here is she going to be able to pull off a victory on the first ballot? And I think what we're going to see if she doesn't win on the first ballot is there's going to be knives out for her pretty quickly because she was so controversial and because she is so anti-establishment and because most of the UCP caucus backs Travis Taves. They didn't endorse Danielle Smith. Now, some of them switched their endorsement to Danielle Smith throughout the leadership race, but she certainly wasn't the caucus favorite. And many of the caucus, including Jason Kenney, including his finance minister, Jason Nixon, even came out and said they didn't support the Alberta Sovereignty Act.
I'll let you get back to the room in a moment, but let me just ask you, Rachel, what's planned format-wise? I know there's obviously been this 2-hour delay, so technically they're supposed to be starting up, I believe, in about 3 minutes' time. I don't think that's going to be happening. So what is the plan as you understand it?
So I'm told that we were supposed to begin at 7, as you mentioned. It looks like that's going to be delayed now. And then we're supposed to, sing the national anthem, the Canadian national anthem. Then there's supposed to be a couple speakers, and then we're going to get right into the vote results very quickly. So sounds like they're running a little bit late, even from the 2 hours that they've pushed back. But the good news is that once the program does get started, it doesn't seem like it's going to be that long of a program.
All right. Well, I know you are going to be hunting down some movers and shakers to interview them. So we'll see you back throughout the evening. Thanks very much, Rachel. We'll check in a bit.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Let me go back to you, William, on this. So obviously we've just heard from Rachel that this hasn't really been an exact clone of the federal leadership race, but some very similar dynamics. I don't know if there's going to be in this race. I don't think there is this really decisive first ballot Poilievre-esque victory. But in general, where do you see moving forward? Because we were talking about the unity issue earlier, and we've also seen a province that has been unafraid, generally speaking, and MLAs have been unafraid to criticize their leaders. So do you think they are going to be able to unify?
Well, I mean, that is the tremendous question that will face whoever does win this leadership race. I think a key difference, of course, between Poliver, who when he won was the front runner for sure, but he also had an overwhelming amount of caucus support. And I think that's a big difference. Is as Rachel mentioned, Danielle Smith, if she does become premier designate tonight and new leader of the United Conservative Party, she won't have had a lot of caucus support going into it. So she's going to have to work quite hard. One thing I think that she also has to do is unite some of the different factions within the United Conservative Party. Because whereas I think a lot of people maybe agreed it was time for a different leader than Jason Kenney, I don't think there's a lot of agreement right now on what the future of the United Conservative Party looks like. So she's going to have to spend, some of her time and effort really bringing those people back into the United Conservative fold and making sure that it's a cohesive party and team. And I think you're going to hear a piece of advice from some other people that says things like she's going to have to, pivot to the center and she's going to have to abandon some of her core policies and things. Well, I can tell you that in my opinion, that would be a really quite a big mistake. You only have to look at when Erin O'Toole ran on a pretty conservative platform for leader. And then after he won, he tacked to the middle. Nobody was happy about that. So she's going to have to not get rid of the things that successfully brought her to the leadership, but build a bigger coalition. And I think those issues are like cost of living, Alberta's relationship with Ottawa, getting a fair deal for our fiscal transfers, all of that sort of thing. And maybe, some innovation in Alberta Health Services and Alberta's healthcare system.
Sounds good. I want to check back in with Rachel Emmanuel here. I know Rachel has a couple of folks she's interviewing, and one of them is Senator-elect Erica Baruti, formerly the president of the UCP. We'll go now to Rachel and Erica in Calgary.
Hi, yes. So I'm joined with Erica Baruti. She's the vice president group. And I'm just going to ask her some questions today. So what are you hoping for today? What do you think is going to be the results of the leadership race?
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, we do have a first ballot, regardless of who's the leader, because of the struggles that we've seen within unity of the party. I do not think that's the case. I think, from what we've seen in the polls, as well as, just the membership engagement, I do think Danielle Smith will come out on top on the first ballot. Well, we'll probably go through a few rounds before we figure out who's the next leader of the United Conservative Party.
And if Danielle doesn't have a first ballot victory, we've seen a lot of her candidates, her opponents, and other UCP MLAs attack her throughout this leadership race. If she doesn't have a first ballot victory, is her ability to unify the caucus going to be that much harder, or do you think it won't matter?
I don't think it'll actually matter. Leadership races, many of us have lived through a lot of them. She was the front runner from the beginning. She was the only candidate that came out with a lot of pretty aggressive policies. And that's kind of the theme of the campaign. Even across Canada, people are like, oh, the Sovereignty Act, right? It's not about names or anything like that, but a piece of policy that hasn't, even been presented or written in the ability for caucus to review. So I think that a lot of it was the policy or the political tactics, as opposed to how people would feel if she's actually the successor and the leader of the party. I think there'll be a little bit of a change. And I also think that, every individual that's in this race knows the sensitivities of unity and the challenges that caucus faced, and know that that's the biggest uphill battle to win the next election. We need to get the internal team in order to be able to find the real enemy, which is Rachel Notley.
So you mentioned some of her pretty aggressive policies. Obviously, the Alberta Sovereignty Act was something that Smith put forward. For those of our viewers who aren't aware of what it is, it would essentially seek to bar federal legislation deemed harmful to Alberta's interest. Now, I'm wondering if you think that the fact that so much of the leadership race was dominated around discussion of this proposal, was that beneficial for Smith, or did it actually put her in a negative light for the general election, with now a lot of Albertans having pretty negative views of this piece of policy?
I don't think it hurt her in the leadership race. It is a pretty party forward type of piece of legislation, like the red meat for the base of the party. So I don't think it hurts her in the leadership race, but yes, the pivot is going to be, probably more challenging for her than maybe another leadership candidate. However, I do think there's a lot of process that goes into it. There's going to be onboarding and the drafting of the legislation, which I always say is like the part that makes none of this stuff that you run on super sexy. So no, I think that there's still opportunity, but it did definitely hit the airwaves. But I also think that, unfortunately for the unity of the party, that was kind of the attack by all other candidates to the front runner and on a piece of policy that she was running off of. So it does make it a little bit more challenging for the internal inside baseball politics, and also kind of the larger Alberta vote. But I think when it actually comes to fruition, it's probably going to be, less intimidating. And, even we've seen lately on something like the gun regulation or the clawback. So, and you have Manitoba and Saskatchewan on side. So there's some things in the Sovereignty Act that have already been put in place, and stuff that we've now seen unity across Western Canada that will help Smith achieve those goals.
For sure. On the Sovereignty Act, we saw Alberta Premier Jason Kenney sort of weighed in, and he commented on it. He said he thought it would make Alberta a laughingstock. Of course, then Kenney's third-party advertiser Shaping Alberta's Future, which on its website said it was created to promote Kenney, it came out and was also attacking Danielle Smith. It said she wasn't a real conservative and sort of critiqued some of her stances in the past. I'm wondering if you think, Kenney's decision to take a position in this UCP leadership race impacted the outcome of the leadership race, and if so, how it did that.
Yeah, well, first I want to disclose, Jason Kenney is a friend and someone as party president that I work closely with. But I don't think it's appropriate for a current leader to interfere in a leadership race. So I do think that it was probably because there wasn't a strong effort or a success by some of the other leadership candidates that he felt he needed to step in for whatever reason he chose to. And I actually think it helped Smith. I think it helped Smith in a lot of the rural ridings. I think it helped show that, she is not so much of the same, which I think people were frustrated with. And so, obviously, again, on the broader population, that didn't help because he has such a large voice across the province as opposed to just the party. But I don't think it's going to hurt her in this leadership race.
Sure. Great. Well, thank you very much, Erica. I'm just going to throw it back to the room and see if there's any questions Andrew would like to ask.
Thing I would just ask purely on a self-indulgent level, Erica, obviously you are a senator-elect, and we know that the federal government has not regarded the Senate elections in Alberta as being legitimate here. Are all the candidates generally in alignment that they want elected senators in Ottawa?
Are all the UCP leadership candidates generally in agreement that they want elected senators in Ottawa?
I mean, selfishly, I would really like that to happen, as I'm sure, I'm not sure if all of the viewers know, I was one of the elected senators that was chosen by Albertans in 2021. So I do think that they believe in that process. I think that's a big sign of having our right to choose and having, that regional representation that the Senate was actually designed for. I haven't personally asked them, but I'm pretty confident that, passing that piece of the act and all of them voting in favor of it shows that they do believe. I mean, I think as UCPers, we want to take less power from take power away from Ottawa and put it to our population. So I can't see how under the party banner they would not support it.
Well, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you very much, Erica. I appreciate your insight.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Erica Baruti, and thank you, Rachel Emmanuel. We'll check back in with them in a few moments' time as things unfold. Now, just to give you the lay of the land here, there were supposed to be results a little over 2 hours ago. They've delayed their UCP program to start at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, which is coming up in -6 minutes. So they are still running behind. Conservatives, generally speaking, do this often at leadership. And Jason Kenney's press conferences, I should say. Jason Kenney always gives good answers at his press conferences, but they never start on time. I'm joined by William McBeath, my colleague at True North, longtime Alberta Politico. I want to pick up where Erica and Rachel left off a little bit here, William, and talk about Jason Kenney's decision to get involved in this race. Very critical of Danielle Smith at the very beginning, even when there was a challenge mounting over his leadership, and now through the race, he's criticized her as well. And this isn't typical. Stephen Harper didn't criticize any of his successors. Erin O'Toole wasn't criticized by Andrew Scheer, and Pierre Poilievre, we hope, is not going to be criticized by Erin O'Toole, and none of these people got involved in the races. What do you make of Jason Kenney, who fancies himself a unifier generally, doing this and getting into this trench?
Well, you're absolutely right that it's highly unusual that a lame duck premier, lame duck party leader who has been he didn't really go for a voluntary walk in the snow. Party members did send him close to packing. If you recall in the vote, he scratched through with something like 51% of support, but he deemed that not enough. So it is very unusual for a sitting party leader to take swipes at any of the leadership contestants, particularly the likeliest person to succeed him in the job. But I think one of the points that both Erica and Rachel made that's so good is I think he felt that the other candidates in the race were not doing a good enough job of raising concerns and issues about Danielle Smith and about her Sovereignty Act proposal and about some of her political history. So I think he felt that since they weren't doing it, we weren't seeing it from effective opponent campaigns, he would take that responsibility on himself. Now, I don't think it was a particularly great decision just because it's going to lead to bad blood. If it is Danielle Smith who's the winner in a couple hours tonight, then she knows that this is not who Jason Kenney wanted to succeed her. And I also think it diminishes Mr. Kenney's record a little bit because it shows again that he's offside with where his own party is by criticizing the person who members could well make his successor in just a little bit.
So one thing I want to ask about Jason Kenney, and it may be too early to answer this question, is effectively about what his legacy will look like. We know that COVID was very difficult for a lot of premiers. He's elected with an agenda. He gets, maybe a year into it, a year and a half into it, and he's got this pandemic to deal with here. Do you think generally people will come back into a more moderate view of him as time goes on?
I do think in the fullness of time, he will improve in the eyes of history, that people will look at some of the things he did, helping to kickstart Alberta's economic growth, getting Alberta back into growth and job mode, cutting business taxes in order to attract new businesses, diversifying Alberta's economy. We're seeing lots of great companies choose to set up shop in Alberta because the government did its best to go out and recruit these people. There's a famous advertising campaign running right now in Toronto, urging Torontonians, young Torontonians, to come to Alberta. They can afford houses. They'll find jobs. They won't have to sit on the 401 for an hour and a half every morning to go to work. So I think history will be kinder. I do think he will suffer some problems around how he managed COVID. And I think, to be honest, he hasn't really understood himself where the problems were with what he did. And, sometimes it's hard when it's you to be, introspective on your own actions. But, the handful of things that I'm thinking of was pursuing the public health orders against pastors, for example. Mm-hmm. The flip-flopping on vaccine passports, saying there wouldn't be one, and now and then making it mandatory. So I think things like that. It's his COVID management that I think is going to linger in some people's minds as the problem. But if you look at the non-COVID things, I think Jason Kenney actually has quite a record to be proud of.
Yeah, I've heard of these ads trying to woo Ontarians to Alberta, and I worry for your sake and the sake of a province that I love dearly, Alberta. It's going to be Florida, where they're going to import all their voting tendencies as well. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. I want to go back to Rachel Emmanuel in Calgary, who has, I believe, someone from Danielle Smith's campaign with her. We're going to do this with all the campaigns. Take it away, Rachel.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Andrew. I'm here with Matthew Altheim. He was the campaign manager for Danielle Smith. Thanks for joining us, Matt. I'm wondering if you're hearing anything so far, if you have any predictions for what the vote result is going to look like tonight.
My predictions are still the same as this morning. We still got to wait for them all to come in, and hopefully the hard work of Danielle Smith, she's been a great candidate to work for. Hopefully that's results in a victory tonight.
Sure, great. So I'm wondering if you think there was any sort of fatal flaws in the campaign. Is there anything you wish that you had done better, big mess ups that you saw tonight that could lead to a lower turnout tonight than you were hoping for?
I don't think so. I think I have a sincere candidate who puts it all the cards on the table and really means what she says when she speaks. And so she's done a great job. I think we all stand behind her, the entire campaign team, 110%, and what we've accomplished. And there's nothing we would change.
We've spoken about this a little bit on the show tonight. The Alberta Sovereignty Act dominated so much discussion throughout the leadership race. You saw it, I'm sure, at all the events that you were at. I saw it at all the events that I was at. Do you think that this benefited Danielle Smith, or do you think that it was negative in the sense that so many of her opponents painted it so negatively, and that's a record that she's going to have to run against in the spring general election?
No, I think we saw the first kind of invocation of the Sovereignty Act last week when the Justice Minister kind of used it in a way on the RCMP gun grab. So, and kind of a shocking turn of events. Saskatchewan and Manitoba feel the same way. So I think Danielle's Sovereignty Act is exactly what Alberta needs. If the Toronto Star hates it, it must be working. And I think Albertans want a premier that's strong and stands strong and means what she says and has strong policy to back it up.
Something that we've seen from some of Smith's critics as well is that she's going to struggle with caucus unity. I'm wondering if you feel this way as well, or you've known her better than most people would. Have you seen efforts from her in recent days to sort of unify the caucus? Has she already begun working on building some of those relationships?
I think she's been reaching out to MLAs from day one, and she's been able to attract a lot of MLA endorsements, including 2 who have switched from other campaigns. So I think it's a testament to her ability to listen, to sit down with people, say, hey, what's going on? What are your ideas and policies for government? And I think that was refreshing for them to hear. It's been a couple of years of division, and a lot of MLAs felt left out of the policy-making process in government. So I think she's willing to bridge that and show them that she's genuine, bring your policies and good ideas to the table, and let's roll.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Matt. Back to the studio.
All right. Thank you very much, Rachel. And thank you, Matt. We're going to have lots of interviews to come with representatives from other campaigns as the evening proceeds. Andrew Lawton here with William McBeath for True North. And I just want to tell you here, I mean, this is one of many opportunities that we take throughout the year when big things are happening to host a live show around them. Sometimes we do them in the studio. Sometimes we have people on the ground and all over like tonight. And we cannot do any of this without your support. And I truly mean that True North is a grassroots operation. The reason we don't get the $1.4 billion a year, if so, we'd be doing it from like a private jet flying over the Maldives or something, not from where we are. But we are always striving to be on the ground for the story. And we need the people that value the work we do to support us so we can continue doing that. So if that is you, please do head on over to donate.tnc.news, donate.tnc.news. And you don't need to be from Alberta. We cover Ontario elections, federal elections, all sorts of stuff. And I think the general tenor of this night is that the conservative movement is having its say, not just one particular party. And I think this has been a shift we've seen really in the last year. And I want to just I'll get back to the Alberta specific focus here, but I wanted to ask you about that more generally, William, because there are, I think, a lot of parallels if you look at the people that are being engaged in the process here in politics this year, from the convoy to Pierre Poilievre's leadership campaign to, I'd say, largely Danielle Smith, but in general, the UCP leadership race as well. Are we seeing this significant turning point in conservative politics in Canada in general right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so fascinating to look at, how conservative parties have changed and how their membership base has evolved. And I think you are seeing a pretty fundamental shift that actually started in other countries a bit earlier. I think you saw with the election of U.S. President Donald Trump, there was very much this move away from establishment politics towards, outsiders and getting rid of maybe some of the traditional alliances that had existed. I think, Republicans would have thought of themselves as the party of big business. But in, the last couple elections, they've been really focusing on blue collar workers, people who live and work in middle America, who've seen their jobs exported to foreign countries. You saw the same thing with the defeat or the successful Brexit vote, where Britain decided to leave the European Union, and the election of Boris Johnson with a huge then majority election. And now I'm thinking Canada with the Freedom Convoy protest, you're starting to see this idea that too much of establishment government politics and society isn't working for ordinary people. Jason Kenney's ads inviting young Torontonians to come to Alberta because they can actually afford a house reflects the fact that how did we get into this mess where people living in Canada's largest city can't afford to buy homes in that city, that they're having to wait 30 or 40 years before they can actually get onto the property ladder because of climbing house prices. So I think that's why you're seeing a lot of the difference in who people are choosing and why establishment candidates are having such a hard time connecting, because there is a very energetic, motivated base, and populism is a factor that will stay in Canadian politics and especially within conservative politics.
Yeah, that is fair. And just to bring it back to an Alberta context, in Ontario, we had two parties that popped up that really didn't make a dent, that were trying to be the true conservatives, the alternative conservative option. You had the New Blue and the Ontario Party. In the polls, didn't really translate to anything. Alberta is a bit different. The Wild Rose Independence Party has a leader who is a former, or had, I guess. I mean, there's a lot of internal turmoil there that we don't need to get into right now, but they had in Paul Hinman, a leader that had been the previous Wild Rose leader. They have in by-elections had a chunk of support. They haven't elected anyone. Now you've got an Alberta Independence Party with Artur Pawlowski at the helm. So you're always going to have, it sounds like, these aggrieved parties. But in Alberta in particular, it does seem like it's harder to get everyone to play on the same team. So do you think there is going to be an issue from these smaller parties in the next election?
I mean, I think that's a critical question. When I talked a little bit earlier about uniting the factions of the United Conservative Party, putting the word united back in that party name is going to be a tremendous challenge, because how do you square some of the different coalitions? Like if you look at the slate of candidates running to be leader, you've got everyone from Leela Ahir to Todd Loewen. And how can they both be in a single political party when they seem so opposite on so many policy areas? So in some ways, I think the United Conservative Party will have to think about what it wants to be. You know, who does it want to appeal to? What policies does it want to have? And how can it build a broad enough coalition in order to win an election, but not become so big that it turned into the old PC party where it really stopped being conservative in many ways, and why the Wild Rose Party, which is a party I worked for 4 years trying to make government, why that got the boost of support it did, that even at one point looked like we might win an election. Just one point I do want to make, which I think is interesting, was when Danielle Smith first announced her candidacy, I didn't know if Albertans were going to accept her return from kind of political exile after the floor crossing and after she had kind of blown up politically and was regarded as almost a pariah. I didn't know how it was going to be that she could come back. The fact that she has come back and faced relatively little opposition for it, to me, tells me that she does have a very good chance of putting forward an option to voters, because they aren't going to, if her own party can forgive her for what had happened and elect her leader, I think everyday Albertans can make that leap as well.
Yes, and I used to guest host for Danielle Smith when she was on the radio at 770 CHQR in Calgary. And I remember when she started that show, the audience hated her. It was very raw at the time, and she's spoken about this as well. And she did do a lot of work. And one thing that I've said about Danielle Smith, and I'm not saying this against other candidates, I've just specifically seen it with Danielle. I would run into her at everything. She was at every event, every conference, every meeting. She really did, over the last several years, put in a lot of the legwork to meet these people. And a lot of those people, the ones that I was talking about a moment ago that might be inclined to support the Wild Rose Independence Party or the Alberta Independence Party, she's actually listened to their concerns and shares some of them, although believes that the UCP is clearly the vehicle to advance that. So I think a lot of people who did have an open mind really did see in Danielle someone that was prepared to own that mistake and move forward.
No, you're quite right. And I think if you have a leader who is prepared to consider alternative points of view, even if they don't necessarily 100% agree with them, I do think you have a lot of an easier time in keeping people inside the coalition. I think to our illustrious Prime Minister, Mr. Trudeau, and how he handled the trucker convoy protests. And something that people have really pointed to as why they disliked the federal government's handling was he simply wouldn't meet with the protesters and he wouldn't listen to their concerns. And if he had done that, I suspect a lot of the wind in the sails of that protest would have gone, and it would have ended probably a little bit sooner, and maybe wouldn't have involved the invocation of the Emergencies Act. But he wouldn't do it. And, I think Danielle hopefully has learned from that and said, I'm going to meet with everybody who, is part of our coalition. I won't necessarily agree with all of them, but I'll be respectful to them, and I'll be respectful of their views and their opinions.
While we are waiting here, I wanted to do a little bit of a throwback. We interviewed several of the leadership candidates over the course of the campaign on my show, and obviously Rachel Emmanuel has done some fantastic coverage on her end of it. And I want to share one clip. We've been talking a lot about Danielle Smith. I want to talk about one of the other contenders here. We have a shorter clip. I think it's only a couple minutes or so, but this is an excerpt from my exchange with former Kenney Cabinet Minister Rebecca Schultz. Oh, maybe we don't have the... Why is it that you want to be the leader of your party and the premier of Alberta?
You know, I would say that first and foremost, I believe in the future of our party, but also in the province of Alberta. We have so much to offer, and we need somebody who can stand up and defend the constitutional rights of Albertans, make sure that we continue to drive economic growth, and keep our party united so that we can defeat the NDP in 2023. Our provincial election next year is in the spring. And so I think, you know, it's been a really difficult time. You know, I think obviously everybody knows that. And I think instead of vilifying each other and as conservatives, focusing on some of the things that divide us, we really need a leader who can bring us together, remember who our true opponent is, which is the NDP, and take them on here in Alberta next year.
You know, we had a leadership review for Premier Kenney that was very close, virtually 50-50. So no matter which way someone goes, the party is divided. The party is split down the middle. How do you not just build a winning coalition from that in the leadership race, but beyond that, when you have that division in your party?
You know, and it's tough. And I think, you know, everybody largely, whether I'm talking to party members or Albertans, I think people agree that they fully expect governments are going to make decisions that they disagree with. I don't think it's that. What we've heard is that, you know, we've gotten off track. Our government has done a lot of really great things. Our economy here in Alberta is kind of on fire. We're taking off coming out of, you know, like I said, an economic recession, a tough 2 years. Our unemployment is at the lowest rate since 2015. More jobs created every day. Things are looking up, but we did get off track. Oftentimes people say it was our tone. We felt like how you were communicating decisions didn't show that you heard what we were saying. We didn't feel heard. We didn't feel listened to. And so I think, A, we have to switch the tone. B, I am so dedicated to the conservative movement. That is not something that's new for me. I think we need somebody who understands that the grassroots party members engaging with people, door knocking, getting out there, listening and taking action, that's important. That's just as important as governing, is keeping our coalition together. And so I think, you know, it takes somebody that's highly motivated, very committed. The first thing I committed to do is door knock in every single constituency across this province, meet with our local UCP community boards and those presidents, make sure that they know that they have a seat at the decision-making table and that they're heard. I'm willing to do that. You know, our opposition here, they are highly motivated. They are working very hard. They are very disciplined. And we need a disciplined team. We have an awesome team. We have amazing, talented MLAs, and they want their talents and strengths to be used as well.
That was my interview early on in the campaign with Rebecca Schultz, one of the candidates vying for the UCP leadership tonight. As I've said, we're checking in with the campaign teams in Calgary. I want to go now to Rachel Emmanuel, who's on the ground with Vitor Marciano from Brian Jean's campaign.
Hey, yeah, I'm joined right now by Vitor Marciano. He is the campaign manager for Brian Jean, as you just mentioned. How are you doing, Vitor? I'm wondering what you're hearing so far tonight. Do you have any results for us yet?
No one has results yet. So we have little bits and pieces of rumors from what our scrutineers saw in the count, in the 5 different regional counts. We're hearing some sense from the people who've been in the room watching the scrutineering happening. It's going to be a tight race. There are 3 front runners. The other candidates have, run good, hard campaigns, but they're not as far ahead as the 3 front runners. And it's probably going to come down to a 5th or a 6th ballot.
You said it's going to be a tight race. Is there still a path to victory for Travis Taves and, your candidate, Brian Jean, who is usually polling 3rd in most of the polls I saw throughout the race?
For Brian, we need to have some of the people underneath us get a good result and get some bounce back from that. That's still possible. For Travis, he needs to close in on Danielle and stay ahead of us with our bounce back. And then there's a path. I mean, it comes down to a lot of things. It comes down to the undervote. It's a preferential ballot. So on the final vote, the denominator is different than it is on the first vote. So you can end up in a circumstance where you can win on the final ballot with the number of ballots that wouldn't have won it for you on the first ballot. So it's a complicated system. It's still available. It's not a foregone conclusion who's won this thing.
You said it's a tight race right now. It's shaping up to be one. You know, some people in the room have been speculating. People think it's likely a Danielle Smith win based on the polling that we've seen. But, you know, some people even thought it was going to be a Danielle Smith win on the first ballot. Do you think that you're surprised by the results tonight, or is this pretty much what you were expecting?
I would be very surprised if it's a Danielle Smith win on the first ballot. I think Danielle is in the lead. I don't completely buy all the polling because there's flaws in the polling when you're polling such a segmented type list. But I do think she's the front runner. But it's hard sometimes for a front runner to get over the top. You know, front runners create their own weather pattern and they create a little bit of an opposition against them. And if you don't finesse that exactly right, it gets a little hard to put the pieces together. So, you know, if I had to bet today, it's probably more likely that Danielle wins than not, but it's by no means certain. And there's still a path for Brian. There's still a path for Travis Taves.
Sure. Something else we've heard a lot about in this leadership race is caucus unity. You know, we need a leader who is going to be able to unite the party. Do you think that if Danielle Smith doesn't win on the first ballot, she wins later on the fifth or the sixth ballot, as you mentioned, is still a possibility? Will it make it harder for her to unify the caucus, you know, showing she doesn't have as much support as people perhaps thought she did?
When you win on the first ballot and you win big, you do a Pierre Poilievre style win, you get to claim a mandate that tells people, line up behind me, do what I tell you to do. I won big. When you win small, you got to do different things to create caucus unity. So you've got to take extra steps. You've got to do more consultation. You've got to listen to people more. You've got to engage more. There's an opportunity to build caucus unity in both circumstances. It just requires different efforts to do those things.
Sure. I just give a notice that we heard a 5-minute warning to take our seats, so that's good news. We'll hopefully be getting some results pretty quickly. But I have just a couple more questions for you here. You know, you just mentioned some of the things Danielle's going to need to do, some different steps. Have you seen her making those steps already? You know, has she been reaching out to your campaign? Has she been showing a coordinated effort to work with you guys after today's vote?
One of the disappointments of this race is the team Danielle was probably a little bit more insular than the other teams. So they've got some work to do on that front. There were open lines of communication amongst the other 6 teams. The lines of communication with Team Danielle were a little bit weaker. She's got to fix that. Doesn't mean she can't. Doesn't mean that she won't if she wins. But it's something that she needs to start working on tonight if she wins, because they weren't working on it very much for the last 2 weeks.
Another thing that Danielle's going to be facing, in addition to needing to unify the caucus, is, of course, she's going to be up for a general election in just a short matter of months. You know, the Alberta Sovereignty Act has received so much attention throughout this leadership race, and a lot of it very negative attention, even from within, you know, her own party, some of the opponents in this leadership race. Is that going to be a detriment against her in the general election? I
think that Danielle will have to refocus the UCP's campaign on the issues that matter to Albertans. I think that's going to be a lot about healthcare. I think that's going to be a lot about cost of living. I think that's going to be a lot about broader energy policy, a lot of pocketbook issues. If she does re-establish her connection with Albertans on those issues, they'll move past the Sovereignty Act. The Sovereignty Act, we're still unclear as to what and how it is, and we'll get to see what becomes of it. But there's lots of room to pick issues that move Alberta voters.
Great. Thanks so much, Vitor. I'm just going to throw it back to the studio.
Thank you very much, Vitor Marciano and Rachel Emmanuel in Calgary. That event is going to be starting up in just a couple of moments. So if you're just tuning in, I'm Andrew Lawton. Hi, thanks for being with us. Joined by William McBeath. This is the True North results show for the United Conservative Party leadership race, the second leadership race the UCP has ever had. The first one, of course, seeing Brian Jean running again, going up against Jason Kenney, who won very decisively. And the big question is going to be unity. And I know that we're talking about Danielle Smith, who has been a clear front runner. She is not the winner yet, and technically may not be the winner. The reality is these ranked ballots can make a lot of different things happen in the race. And you have to get over that 50% plus one threshold. And if, let's say Leela here and Rajan Sani and Rebecca Schultz do very well and their votes go to Travis Taves, say, or Brian Jean, this is a way that Danielle Smith could find herself in the lead on every ballot except for the last one. And that's what happened federally to Maxime Bernier. He led every single round of balloting except for the 13th, which ended up being the final round. And that was the round that gave Andrew Scheer the win. So just as we're waiting to get things rolling here, I want to kick over to you, William, and ask you generally about, you're a political strategist. You've got a good mind for this thing. No matter who the leader is, how do they get that runway clear and start immediately from day one campaigning? So what is if you're the chief of staff to the new premier, whoever it is, what's your advice to them on the first 7 days, the first 30 days, and then the next 9 months?
So, I think these are critical questions, and they're the ones that every one of the candidates should be thinking about right now. At least initially, caucus unity is going to have to be the very first job of the new leader. If it's Travis Taves, that'll probably be a little bit easier because he had so much caucus support. But of course, he was also in the Kenney cabinet that a lot of MLAs had concerns and issues with. So I think he's going to have to try and explain and convince some of his caucus that he is not just more of the same when it comes to Jason Kenney and how business was before. And obviously, we talked about Danielle and needing to bring in people who maybe haven't supported her in this leadership race. They endorsed other candidates. She's going to have to really work hard to bring them on board. But once she gets caucus unity done, I think she's going to have to spend a lot of time traveling Alberta, meeting with groups of voters, meeting with the stereotypical church meetings in the church basement, and sitting down with these groups and really listening to their concerns and understanding them. And it's something she's done in the past. I mean, I worked for Danielle Smith for 4 years, and she loved to tour, and I think that's a real strength. And it's something she had in common with Jason Kenney, who also loved to travel around and meet with groups of people. So I think that's it. And then it'll be important to understand the best way to fight and win an election in Alberta right now. And if it were up to me, I don't think Rachel Notley is the primary opponent in an Alberta election. I believe it's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. So if I were the new leader, I would be talking about fighting back against the Trudeau Liberals, fighting back against Prime Minister Trudeau, and I would try and sideline Rachel Notley and the Democrats. Or if I do talk about them, I talk about them as part of that Liberal NDP coalition. So I think that was a mistake Kenney made, was focusing a little too much on Notley and not going hard enough against Justin Trudeau. I think that the new leader really does have to understand there is little love in Alberta for the Trudeau family as a whole. Maybe his children. We don't know them that well, but we don't love him. We don't love his father. And I think making him public enemy number one, really having him be the antithesis, is going to be smart political strategy for whoever wins.
I would agree with that. And it's interesting because on the surface, I mean, any Alberta conservative I know just hates the very idea of the NDP. But as a person, Rachel Notley does not have the negative association that Justin Trudeau does on personality, on policy, on anything. And her government, I mean, did a lot of very harmful things, but it wasn't a scandal-plagued government. I mean, as far as integrity, I think Rachel Notley probably wins over Alison Redford, say. So you are right that I think there needs to be this square focus on our enemy is not the NDP, our enemy is Ottawa.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the good thing, of course, is that there is that ready-made opponent in the form of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who has maintained an opposition to oil and gas and pipelines and all sorts of things which are important to the livelihood of Albertans. So there is plenty of opportunity to push that. And I think that's how Danielle sells her Sovereignty Act, maybe not in the fine details of how it stops a law or may stop a law or doesn't stop a law, but in sending the clear message to Ottawa that they need to get out of Alberta and stop hurting our province.
Yeah, and let me just, ask you, just what are your top 3 issues on the agenda that you think the next premier needs to put at Justin Trudeau's feet at the negotiating table?
I think we're going to have an important conversation about equalization. I think Albertans believe it is an unfair formula. And, the left often likes to point out that it was negotiated under Stephen Harper. Well, the world was very different when that negotiation last happened. And now we think that Alberta is penalized for having to send so much money to other provinces who aren't particularly grateful for the financial contributions Alberta makes to the Federation. Quebec has in particular maintained a very anti-energy policy towards Alberta. So I definitely think that's on the topic. I think there are conversations around energy infrastructure. You know, the Prime Minister has said things like phase out oil and gas or end oil and gas. And I think Alberta has to be absolutely strong and say, look, we have this brilliant advanced sector that does a great job. It is making improvements to how it does its business of extracting oil and gas. And we are world leaders in some of that. Why would you strangle something which brings wealth and energy security to not just all of Canada, but it could be to bring it to international countries as well? And then I think if it were me, I would probably want to start to tackle healthcare, because I think there's a real dissatisfaction amongst Albertans with the status quo on their healthcare system. The Liberals have always said they will not tolerate anybody deviating from a single publicly funded universal healthcare system. They don't want a 1.5 system. They don't want any form of innovation. I think Danielle or whoever it is could take a firm stand and say, well, no, healthcare is a provincial jurisdiction. We are going to innovate in healthcare.
Just if you're tuning in now, we are carrying the United Conservative Party leadership results. They'll be starting up any moment now. The official program, it sounds like, is just about to get underway. They're just doing some housekeeping and formalities right now. And once the actual program and presentations begin, we will throw live to it as soon as that happens. And that is taking place in Calgary. And what we understand is that after the issues that they encountered today, the one thing that I would point out is that they are delayed, but they've promised, it sounds like, and we're keeping our fingers crossed, that the results are going to be delivered very quickly. So as I understand it, the ballots have been counted. They have the result. They're not going to be needlessly going through the process of keeping us all in suspense, which, as we know from the 2020 federal Conservative leadership race, can sometimes last quite a bit. That was the infamous broadcast that went to 3 a.m. But even the last one was quicker for Pierre Poilievre, but still they did drag it on even though they had the answer. So we are going to go live to the events in Calgary. I believe they're just doing the national anthem right now, but we'll go to that feed.
With glowing hearts we see thee rise, thy throne life strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand in God for thee. O Canada, we stand on God for
Please be seated. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's an exciting night to be together. The United Conservative Party is a coalition built on a strong set of principles: support for a robust civil society, free speech, economic freedom, limited government, fiscal responsibility, protecting public safety, and supporting the family. Support for these principles and the hard work of our leader and our team led to our overwhelming election victory in 2019. Over 1 million Albertans supported a platform that laid out exactly what we would do. And the UCP government has now completed nearly 95% of those campaign promises. As a result, we live in a province with the fastest growing economy in this country, with all of its advantages. Our leader, Jason Kenney, has put his heart and soul into enhancing the livelihoods of Albertans. We intend to do a more fulsome tribute to him at our upcoming annual general meeting in Edmonton, but tonight, on behalf of the UCP Board of Directors and all of our members, I want to thank him for his service. We are better for his enormous commitment and wish him success in the future. It's an extremely exciting time for our party. The leadership candidates have helped grow our membership to historical levels. They met tens of thousands of members at events, forums, and our 2 official debates. They have traveled from Lethbridge to Medicine Hat, Calgary to Lacombe, Edmonton to Grand Prairie and Fort McMurray, and everywhere in between, speaking with Albertans on issues that matter to them. This leaves our party in a great position to take on the NDP in the upcoming provincial election. While our economy is booming with the largest in-migration in our history, we know that not everyone is benefiting equally. The challenges we face are well known. The discussions have been robust. Congratulations to our leadership candidates. Leela here, Brian Jean, Todd Lowen, Rajan Sani, Rebecca Schultz, Danielle Smith, and Travis Taves for their thoughtful and caring discussions of our future. To the campaign teams, all of you here and at home, you worked hard, played by the rules, engaged in the process, scrutineered in the verification center, and for the vote and count today. You joined hundreds of volunteers who risked serious paper cuts, spending hours checking IDs and making sure that every eligible vote could be counted. Thank you for your service. We are pleased to report that close to 85,000 of our eligible members have participated in electing our new leader, an incredible level of engagement. Tonight, you will hear from both our Leadership Election Committee Chair, David Price, and our returning officer, the Honorable Rick Orman, who we owe a deep sense of gratitude. This process was executed under their leadership. David was joined by a diverse group of experienced UCP members on the Leadership Election Committee. We are grateful for their hard work. The staff, under the direction of our Executive Director, Dustin Van Voot, continues to work in the best interests of our membership. We have one of the strongest political teams in Canada. We're not quite ready for the results, so before I bring up David and Rick, let's talk about the days ahead. We know why we are all here: to ensure the re-election of a united Conservative government so that this province continues to move forward and we don't lose all of the gains that have been made. That's right. Albertans want to see this government re-elected, but in order to earn their support, we need to be a disciplined party that Albertans can trust. We need to be united. I've been listening to you, and I know you want to be united in fighting the next election. Now, let me remind you that there are just under 250 days before that election. I ask each and every one of you to think about how you can contribute to a successful campaign in 2023. Whether you're a party volunteer or a candidate, whether your contribution can be big or small, every part of our team is needed. One more thing. Please join us at our annual general meeting at the River Cree Resort at Enoch in Edmonton later this month. We'll be doing important party business, including board elections, policy and governance, and election readiness training. And perhaps most importantly, our new leader will be giving an address to our membership. You won't want to miss it. It's a huge milestone. We're choosing the next leader of our party and the next premier of the province. To all of our leadership candidates here tonight, the message from our party and members is simple. We're behind you. We're united, and we'll do whatever you need to win the next election and keep Alberta on the right track. Thank you. I will now invite David Price, Chair of the Leadership Election Committee, to say a few words about the committee's work. David?
Well, thank you very much, Cynthia, and thank you all for coming here tonight. Dear friends, our Leadership Election Committee was called upon in May earlier this year to put in place the rules and procedures of our leadership contest. The membership of our committee included 12 individuals from across our province and from very diverse backgrounds, representing an excellent cross-section of our membership. I'd also like to note that every member on our committee served as a volunteer. Every single member of our committee dedicated hundreds of hours to our task, sacrificing time with their families and taking time away from their jobs and other commitments to serve. Now, these are some of the finest people that I have had the pleasure of working with in my professional career, and I could not be more proud of the work of our committee. Thank you. Together, our committee delivered robust rules for a fair, open, secure, and transparent leadership election. We did not promise we'd be running on time, though. But our overriding ethos during this whole process has been that of integrity, accountability, and fair play. Our every decision has been governed by one simple question: how do we do right by our members, by you? Our balloting process flexibly provided for both mail-in and in-person voting. The verification of ballots, the counting of ballots, and the calculation of results today has taken place under the supervision of our returning officer, our neutral returning officer, Rick Orman, and his team of deputy returning officers and an army of volunteers. In addition, all campaigns have been consulted throughout this process and have been invited to have their volunteer scrutineers observe both the verification and counting processes. Of course, I want to thank the candidates and their teams for all their hard work. Each candidate and all their volunteers should be proud of the energetic campaigns they've run, the vigorous ideas and platforms that they've put forward, and their significant efforts to recruit tens of thousands of new members to our party. Most importantly, though, I want to thank all the candidates for standing behind our process and respecting our rules. In addition, I want to thank the party staff and all of our volunteers who helped get us to this point this evening. It's been hard work, and they have not only processed all those new memberships, but they've ensured that we got over 120,000 ballots to our members in plenty of time to get them mailed back and counted. And all said, we had approximately 85,000 ballots cast in this election. That is a huge turnout, folks. And we could not have had a smoother process, and we are very grateful to the hard work and the dedication of our staff and volunteers. And finally, I do want to thank the party board, especially Cynthia, for their resolute support of our committee and the trust that they placed in us to independently shepherd this process. It has been an absolute pleasure to have participated in this endeavor as we close out this long process tonight. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you to all of the dedicated members of the Leadership Election Committee for doing such a great job. Okay, we are very close to getting the results. We'll take a quick break before being joined by the returning officer, Rick Orman, and the auditor from Crowe McKay. 5-10 minutes, and we'll be back.
Well, as you see there, they're doing the suspense thing where they make us wait for the obligatory 5 to 10 minutes before they come back and start reading the results. That was David Price, who very well regarded member of the Conservative movement. I've actually, years and years ago, I worked with him very briefly. Very great guy. He is the head of basically the head of the election. So he's been the one overseeing this. He was just giving predominantly a thank you to this volunteer run effort. And I just want to make a point here. Obviously, you can do a leadership race on a very expedited time frame. I think the record goes to the Ontario PCs in 2018 when they basically had to do the whole thing in about 6 weeks. The UCP took about 5 months, but still, they weren't planning for a race. They were planning to be getting ready for a general election right now. So generally speaking, William, let me just ask you that. Do you think that it has been a race that has been effectively and well organized and well run by the candidates and by the party itself?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't particularly heard a lot of concerns about the administration of the leadership race. The only grumbling I heard was the decision of having Premier Kenney remain as premier up until the new premier is chosen. Although personally, I think bringing in an interim premier adds some instability when we were still in a time of dealing with a public health issue. And so, but no, I really haven't had heard concerns that the race wasn't run in a fair and equitable manner. I think the campaigns of the different candidates probably weren't the strongest I've seen from some of them. I think they fell into a bit of a trap that Danielle Smith set for them. And that was, they spent almost all of the election talking about the policy issue that she wanted to talk about. And that when you're talking about your opponent's preferred policy, even when you're attacking it, it's not good for you and your campaign. And so I do think that was a trap a lot of them fell into. And I think if she is victorious later on tonight, I think there will be people who look back on that and think that was a tactical error.
Yeah, you are right. The Alberta Sovereignty Act, like the name recognition, the name ID on that now is quite significant, just mainly because of all the criticisms of it. Let's go back to Rachel Emmanuel, who is at UCP headquarters in Calgary right now. Rachel, I understand you're chatting with someone here.
Yes, thanks. I'm joined by John Horsman. Horsman was a former UCP leadership candidate, actually. He was in the race for about a month, but he ended up dropping out and endorsing Travis Toews. So, John, I'll just let you say in your own words, why did you drop out of the UCP leadership race, and why did you decide to endorse Travis Toews?
Yeah, so it turned out I actually didn't have enough time to build the momentum I needed to be a credible candidate in this race. And when I saw 8 great candidates moving forward, I just thought being the 9th on the table was just really too much. The reason why I endorsed Travis Toews is I'd worked with him. As he was in the Department of Finance, and I knew he was a principled leader. I knew he would create stable leadership for Alberta, which I thought was really, really important for the business conditions that we currently, are living in. And so he was my top candidate. He, for me, brought the most responsible government to the table.
Some of the interviews that we've had today with Vitor Marciano, for example, he's the campaign manager for Brian Jean. He said he thinks there's still a path to victory for Travis Toews. Do you agree that there's still a path to victory for Travis, or do you think it's more likely to go to Danielle Smith, who, everyone else is expecting to take home the win tonight?
I think there is a path, but I would concede it's a narrow path. You can't say no until it's over, and you just don't know what happened today with the physical turnout. And you don't know what's going to happen with the seconds And the folks that actually only filled out one name on their ballot, and as those candidates drop away, it's very hard to predict.
Sure. And John, you've told me before that you're interested in running for the UCP nomination in Calgary Elbow. Calgary Elbow is Doug Schweitzer's riding. He was a Kenney cabinet minister. He actually resigned. That seat is going to be open, but they're not going to do the by-election. You know, if you put your name forward for that seat, does it depend on who's the leader, or if Smith wins, are you still interested in going for the UCP nomination in that riding?
Yeah, it's a good question. I truly believe that I can help the UCP, I can help Alberta, and irrespective of who the leader that gets chosen tonight, I can be helpful to actually move the province forward and also move the party forward. And so, no, I'm committed to being a part of this. If I can win the nomination, that would be lovely. They haven't called the nomination yet, and I haven't submitted my papers, so there's a couple hurdles yet to go. But I'm ready, and I'm in motion.
All right. Well, thanks very much, John. We're going to go back to the studio now.
Thank you very much, Rachel and John. The UCP is just taking a little bit of an intermission while they prepare themselves to give us the results. So we'll cut back to that in Calgary as soon as we are able to, as soon as we have a program to go to. So don't worry, you're not missing anything. There is right now nothing to be missed as far as results go, but hopefully we'll have those in the coming moments here. And obviously, John just mentioned in that interview with Rachel that regardless of who the leader is, he sees himself as being able to play a role and move beyond this. And I mean, the theme of the night, William, you and I have been talking about it since the beginning, is unity. Do you think by and large that's going to be the message from a lot of people that, yeah, they swap their blows during the leadership race, but when push comes to shove, they want a strong conservative Alberta government to go up against the NDP, to go up against Trudeau, and they'll go along with whoever the leader is?
Oh, I absolutely think you're going to see a very coordinated message of unity from every public actor in this race. I mean, it will be challenging for some of them, I think. I think, for example, Brian Jean kind of feels like he may have been robbed of this leadership that, when he put out his Autonomy for Alberta plan and had it compared to Danielle Smith's Sovereignty for Alberta plan, that he probably wasn't thrilled that kind of captured his entire top line messaging. But yes, no, I think you're absolutely going to see a lot of talk about unity, about getting back to where we were, doing things in the interests of everyday Albertans, all of that kind of messaging. I think it's interesting too that you're probably going to start to see a lot more targeted politics, because in Alberta, there's Edmonton, there's Calgary, and there's kind of all of the rest. But if you want to win an election in Alberta, you really need at least 2 out of those 3 zones. And Rachel Notley, very strong, and the Democrats very strong in Edmonton, very not strong in rural Alberta, in the areas outside Edmonton and Calgary. And I think Calgary will be a battleground. So I suspect that the new premier and his or her team will be spending an awful lot of time in Calgary, talking to Calgarians and showing not just the successes that have happened under the UCP, but putting forward an agenda that will appeal to Calgarians. This, I believe, will be the city where the next election, the next government is decided.
We are, throughout the course of the evening, just playing some clips from our coverage and interviews with the leadership candidates throughout the race. I want to go to a clip now of my interview I think it was about 4 or 5 weeks ago with Brian Jean, one of the candidates who we heard from his campaign team member, Vitor Marciano, a few moments ago. Let's talk about the equalization aspect specifically. We know that Albertans overwhelmingly voted to really reevaluate the equalization system that we have right now. And obviously the prevailing thesis is that when a province comes together like that and votes in such a way, the federal government has to negotiate. But a duty to negotiate, a constitutional duty to negotiate, is not a duty or requirement to give any concession. And the Liberals have been consistently resistant to, I think, respecting a lot of the concerns that Albertans have. So what would you do differently, or what would you do to actually get what it is that Alberta wants and needs from the federal government at that negotiating table?
I'm glad you asked that, because other candidates are talking about getting angry and what we're going to do up to a certain point, but they have no answers for what happens afterwards. So they're riling people up, getting people mad for no reason. We live in an amazing country. It's a free country, and the Constitution clearly lays out that under Section 46, if a majority of a population in a certain area is dissatisfied with the current Confederation and how they're being treated under Confederation, we can send notice after receiving a clear mandate from the people, a majority of the people, a good majority. We can send that mandate to the people under the Section 46 notice, and they have to sit down and negotiate with us. And if they don't, then we go to the Supreme Court of Canada and ask for reference. Listen, let's be clear here. I'm the only lawyer, litigator, person that spent 10 years practicing the law here in Alberta. I know how it works. I'm not guessing it. I don't have to talk to another government bureaucrat lawyer to tell me how to pursue this and how to go forward. I've spent enough time understanding both 10 years federally as a member of parliament, as a parliamentary secretary, and as a practicing law in Alberta for 10 years. And then as a business person, I know what Albertans want. They want more autonomy, more freedom, less oversight and overwatch from Ottawa. I mean, that's where all the gatekeepers are. That's what we have to remove from.
But if the Constitution gets them to the table, what do you do at the table that will get that change you need?
Get the rest of the provinces on side to get better healthcare funding, get more rights in the Senate and the House of Commons, so we actually have equal votes across the country. There are so many things that we need to change. The fiscal imbalance is clearly there. Equalization is one of those things. The rest of the provinces, the premiers are ready to go to the table over the pipeline ban. We're ready.
That was my interview with Brian Jean in this campaign just a little while ago. And we were touching on in that interview the idea of getting a fair deal from Ottawa. And this was, to your point earlier, William, before COVID came into the discussion here, one of the big grievances I was hearing from a lot of the conservative base in Alberta about Jason Kenney is that he wasn't going to Ottawa, banging his fist on the table and really standing up as forcefully as they wanted. And Danielle Smith's answer to that has been the Sovereignty Act. Brian Jean's answer to it has been autonomy. There is still a pocket of Alberta, generally conservatives, that want separation. They're done playing. They want out of Canada. And I don't know how large that group is versus how many of them are accessible UCP voters if someone is taking that issue seriously.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important question. I don't think support for sovereignty is quite as high as it once was. I think when there was a NDP premier in Alberta and a Liberal prime minister in Ottawa, that was a breeding ground for separatist sentiment. I think certainly there was a belief that none of our governments were on the side of everyday Albertans or the energy sector, things like that. I think there is a sovereignty movement out there, but I think a lot of it is probably just wanting to see concrete steps taken to try and protect Alberta from Ottawa's intervention. So things like creating an Alberta provincial police force, or having an Alberta pension plan, or having Alberta collect all of the taxes, remitting only the federal share to Ottawa rather than having Ottawa do the collecting. And so it's some of these things, some of which are, will have a very big impact, others of which are a little bit more symbolic. But I think as long as whoever becomes the new premier is seen to be actually making concrete progress on it, I don't think you're going to see full-on separatist settlement really bubble up and become a motivating political force in Alberta again, for at least right now.
Our colleague Rachel Emmanuel has been keeping very busy in Calgary, and I understand she's got with her Rebecca Schultz's campaign manager. So we'll go to Rachel now if she's up and run. No, she's not ready. We'll go to her in a moment, and she'll be with Rachel, with Rebecca Schultz's campaign manager when we do go there. One thing I will note here is that a lot of the time, and this happened in the federal election campaign as well, we think things are a lot more acrimonious than they are. And then everyone does get under the banner. So, nominations, leaderships, they're supposed to be tense. So it's not the end of the world when it is there. But the whole point is you also don't want like a Liberal situation where you give so many and so bloody attacks in the leadership race that they become the attack ads in the general election. That was what happened with the famous "Do you think it's easy to make priorities" line from Stéphane Dion. We have Rachel with Rebecca Pollack now, I believe.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm joined by Becca Pollack, who, as I mentioned, is the campaign manager for Rebecca Schultz. Thanks for joining us, Becca. I'm wondering if you have any speculations, if you've heard anything about what we're expecting for the results tonight.
I don't know if I have any speculations, but, I think over 85,000 of our members came out tonight. So I think that says something about participation. All I can say is I'm really proud of our team. and where I think that we are, but no speculations quite yet.
Sure. And, Rebecca was polling sort of in the midway range throughout the campaign. Do you expect her to sort of fall in that voting area tonight, or you maybe expect her to surge ahead a little bit, fall behind? Where do you actually expect her to end up on the vote tonight?
Well, you know what? I always like to think that I don't follow polls because I think although it's a good measure, I think Rebecca's going to do well. And you know what? We grinded till the very end. We started this thing, and almost nobody in Alberta knew Rebecca's name. And here we are tonight, and I think she's going to do well, and I'm proud of her regardless of the outcome.
Something that I think was interesting about Rebecca Schultz is so many of the other candidates were very keen to target and attack Danielle Smith, the perceived front runner. People are expecting a Danielle Smith win tonight. A couple weeks before the vote, there was a press conference where 4 candidates decided to hold a press conference and basically criticize the Alberta Sovereignty Act and say that it was dangerous for Alberta and it would wreck investment in our province. Rebecca did not join that press conference. Why didn't she join, and do you think it was the right move?
Well, I think that a lot of the campaign was spent talking about the Sovereignty Act, and I think everybody had their opportunity to explain themselves if they supported it, how they would do things differently. Rebecca had a 100-day plan. I thought it was a great plan. We talked a lot about the Sovereignty Act, and I think there are other things that Albertans really, truly are looking for: changes in healthcare, changes in education, affordability, and I think that that's where our campaign really stood out, was just sticking to those things that we kept hearing. And so for that, I think that was probably why we didn't show up on that stage.
Sure, and I think that's a very fair argument because the Sovereignty Act did dominate so much discussion of the UCP leadership race, and some of the other issues and policies didn't actually have a chance to break through. On that point, we've been talking a little bit about how Danielle Smith was running sort of as an anti-establishment candidate, and some of the other candidates, they worked for Kenney. They were one of Kenney's ministers, including Rebecca Schultz, who was, the Children's Service Minister. She often touts her record and the great childcare deal that she got from Ottawa in that role. She, early on in the campaign, said, I'm not part of the boys' club. I was never part of the inner circle. Do you think that she was successful in positioning herself as a candidate who was, not associated with Jason Kenney and didn't carry his record?
Well, I don't know if it was disassociating from Jason Kenney, because I can't say that our record was all that bad. Obviously, there's a reason why we're here tonight, and we didn't get everything right. But I do think Rebecca was different than all of the other candidates in her own way. She thought common sense. She had ideas. She took her platform from everyday Albertans and really listened to people. And I think she has something to offer the entire group and Alberta that other people don't. So I think on her own, and this team did a great job differentiating as just a good common sense conservative candidate.
For sure. And that was Becca Pollack, the campaign manager for Rebecca Schultz. I'm going to throw it back to the studio now.
Thank you very much for that, Rachel Emmanuel, with Becca Pollack from Rebecca Schultz's campaign. So we've had representatives from we've had representatives of a lot of the campaigns now. I think we have not had anyone from Leela Ahir or Rajan Sani or Todd Lowen's campaign just yet, but obviously Rachel is working the floor there very well, and she'll be pulling people over to chat as best as they can. William, let me get your reaction to that, because there was a little bit of, I don't want to say tap dancing in a negative way, but I think there's a little bit of apprehension in the party on how to deal with the Jason Kenney question, because he's very well liked and well regarded in the conservative movement broadly, certainly if you just pluck the last 2 years out of the picture. And I think that in the UCP, there is a little bit of a mixed emotion about him. A lot of people very frustrated with what happened in the last 2 years, but they also don't want to treat him as though he's toxic, which I think would be incredibly unfair.
Absolutely. And I think probably politically really unwise to tarnish the guy in the government who's been in power for, coming on 3.5 years. And Becca's points, which I think are well made, are that the Kenney government did a lot of good things too. And I think, as I talked about a little bit earlier, there might be a danger that a new premier goes too fast and too far, jettisoning either the legacy of the Kenney government or some of the policies that got them the win. I think
to be the anti-Kenney, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Either just to be the anti-Kenney or to pull an Aaron O'Toole and drop the key things that got your base excited for you. And I think specifically, you're going to see a lot of pressure for Danielle Smith to maybe water down or even repudiate the Sovereignty Act. And in my personal opinion, that would be politically very damaging move for her to make. I think it would consign her to defeat. Where candidates, and sometimes we're all guilty of this if we are on Twitter, we have to remember that the people on Twitter are not real people. They are a tiny fraction of hyper engaged, usually very partisan people who you will never win their votes. But that won't stop them from telling you you have to do things to try and win their vote. You have to apologize for this. You have to give up on that. Whereas what it's really about is winning the hearts and minds of ordinary people from one end of the province to the other. Those people are not on Twitter. They are at their jobs. They are taking care of their families. They're living their lives. They're not hyper obsessing about all of the minutia on Twitter. So I think that's also something that candidates really have to bear in mind. The people telling them to apologize, to drop their support for things, or to demonize the Kenney legacy, these are not the voters that are even accessible to a re-elected United Conservative government.
Yeah, and I also think it's very true, certainly in Alberta politics, that you can't win a war on two fronts. And Jason Kenney, I thought, did very well at pushing back against the media a lot of the time. I think he did very well at pushing back against the left. I mean, the way he speaks about some of the environmental activists is stuff that I wish conservatives were saying 10, 12 years ago, because even Stephen Harper was more subdued in his criticism to a large extent compared to Jason Kenney. And I've actually faced criticism for giving Kenney any credit at all, because there is a lot of just very vicious hatred, and I can't share in that. If you want to take that approach, that's completely your choice. But I think this guy has been a conservative stalwart, and as frustrated and annoyed, and I'll say yes, angry at times as I was with how the Kenney government responded to COVID. I also don't I refuse to judge people by the very worst moments and by their worst decisions. And I think you have to look at a longer picture of service here. And the fact that without Jason Kenney, there may well be an NDP government right now in Alberta. And I don't think that's an unfair claim to make.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, we were heading into another election cycle where there were going to be two strong conservative, small c conservative parties, the PC party and the Wild Rose party. The Wild Rose party winning primarily votes in rural Alberta, the PC party winning primarily votes in Calgary. But if they're splitting the votes in rural Alberta and in Calgary, it offers all the opportunity for Rachel Notley to win in one of those regions. And that is largely why she won in 2015, was a big chunk of Calgary ended up voting for her. So I do think that Kenney needs to be remembered as someone who made sure that, as he would like to say, the NDP were one and done in Alberta. We kept them to a single term. So yeah, no, you're totally right. And whether I didn't agree either with all of his management in COVID, I think there are obviously big examples we can think of how he approached some pastors and religious services. The decision to call it the best summer ever. Alberta was open forever, except then we locked down again and brought in a vaccine passport, things like that. And if possibly he had taken a little bit more time to reflect and apologize for some of those things, maybe it wouldn't have gotten to the crisis point it would. But certainly I do think there were a lot of great things he did, part of which is the rewriting of Alberta's curriculum, which had gone completely crazy under the Democrats. And Alberta students were at risk of being able to neither do basic reading or basic arithmetic because of just education fads that the last government brought in. So we did have a major curriculum reform, and now Alberta students are once again improving in core areas like mathematics and reading.
One thing that I will say is that we were talking earlier about how Jason Kenney was getting involved, I think, against most people's expectations in the leadership race. I think in general, one of the things that's very interesting to look at here is the fact that Jason Kenney's not going out quietly in terms of what he's doing as a premier right now. Like, I can't share my screen at the moment, but I have had more Alberta government press releases in the last few days than I think I've had in the last 3 years. So it just seems like there's announcement. And I don't know if this is just Jason Kenney getting things that were on his bucket list off the bucket list, or if this is, in a lot of ways just an effort to build momentum. But it does sometimes actually, give a bit of a complicated look at, are they committing the next leader to things that they don't want to do? Are they committing the leader to a path that they aren't necessarily ready to go down on? So I think we're going to have to explore these and many other questions as the program continues. I'm getting the word that we are just about to go back to the show in Calgary. So once I'm told to throw away, I'll do that. But just very, very quickly, William, do you think Kenney is trying to just like do as much as he can in these last few days that he's the premier?
Yeah, I mean, I do think there is something to that. Maybe he just wants to burnish that record, that legacy a little bit as he's in his final days of office. But also as a premier who, when you do have that finite shelf life, you do want to get things done. And Jason Kenney has always been a politician who was about getting things done. He was never just doing the bare minimum and letting the days flood by. Jason Kenney was always active. And even when he was a Harper minister, very much the same. So I think he just didn't want to go gently into that good night, as the poem says.
Yeah, fair enough. I appreciate that. And the feed that, so as I understand, there is someone on stage. The feed is just getting caught up. So we'll go back to that feed right now. This is live in Calgary for the results.
Auditor for this process to say a few words. And I want to thank Sam. They spent hundreds and hundreds of hours both in the verification center and during the count today.
Thank you, everybody. Our firm, Cromakai LLP, was engaged by the UCP to oversee and conduct various agreed-upon procedures over the duration of this UCP leadership race and election day itself. To begin with, I would like to confirm that our team was independent at the start of the engagement and has remained independent throughout the process. The end goal was for us to validate the election process and the tabulation of the election results based on the agreed upon procedures that we performed. To that end, the procedures we performed covered custody and security of the mail-in ballots, the verification process of the ballots, the in-person voting process, and finally, the process over the security, integrity, and logic of the tabulation software providing the election results. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam, and to the entire team at Cromakai for your support and professionalism. Now, I would like to invite our Chief Returning Officer, Rick Orman, to explain the voting process.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rick Orman, and I'm the Chief Returning Officer. And our job is to oversee the leadership election and ensure compliance with all the rules and all the procedures. I was assisted in this task by 3 exceptional Deputy Returning Officers, Doug Caswell, Ken Bradley, and from Edmonton, Andy Travoy, and by 5 excellent in-person DROs, those that were in the remote sites, Ian Brody, Linda Lowe, Stephen Butt, Dale Langford, and Don Hubble. And we were supported by over 250 party volunteers who dedicated countless hours in helping with our verification process for the mail-in ballot and as poll clerks at our 5 polling locations. I'd like to thank all of these volunteers for their hard work and their loyalty to their party. And let me tell you, if anybody thinks this party is in trouble, they ought to come and talk to me, because I saw 2,000 hours of volunteer time to make this process work. The bylaws of the United Conservative Party require that a leadership election be conducted via a one-member, one-vote system. Unlike the federal party, we do not have a riding-by-riding weighted system. In Alberta, one membership means one vote, no matter where you live. To be named leader, a candidate must win a majority of the valid votes cast. If after the first round no candidate receives a majority, then the lowest placed candidate will be dropped from the race, and we will relocate their ballots based on their second choices and add them to the totals. This process is repeated until a candidate receives a majority, 50% plus one vote. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the time has arrived. We have the results for the first ballot. No candidate has received a majority of the valid votes cast, so we will go to another ballot. Leila Ahir has dropped off from the race, and the next choice on those ballots will be redistributed to the other candidates. We had 84,593 ballots cast. And I will read to you the percentage received by each candidate. Leila Ahir, 1.65%. Brian Jean, 10.99%. Todd Lowen, 7.68%. Rajan Sani, 2.11%. Rebecca Schultz, 6.9%. Danielle Smith, 41.31%. Travis Taves, 29.35%. So those are the results of the first ballot, and I'll be back in 5 minutes with the redistributed numbers. Thank you.
That was the first round of results in the UCP leadership race. Now, I have to assume what they're doing is keeping us in deliberate suspense when they have the results in an envelope back there. But they're going to do this thing where every round they're going to come out and take 5, 6 minutes, 10 hours, who knows how many between them. But I just want to give you those numbers here very quickly. Leila Ahir, 1.65%. She was eliminated on the first ballot. This is an MLA, a very fierce critic of Jason Kenney. Brian Jean, 10.99%. Todd Lowen, 7.68%. Rajan Sani, 2.11%. Rebecca Schultz, 6.9%. Danielle Smith, 41.3%. And 41.31%, and Travis Taves with 29.35. So Danielle Smith in a clear lead. She's got a 12-point lead over Travis Taves, but not a runaway. They go on to the next round. And we'll crunch the numbers a little bit in a moment. But first, I want to go to Rachel Emmanuel, who's back in Calgary with Drew Barnes, formerly of the UCP caucus, now an independent MLA. Rachel, go ahead.
Thanks, Andrew. As you mentioned, I'm here with Drew Barnes, a man who really needs no introduction if you're an Albertan. He's quite infamous in these parts. Drew, we've just got the first ballot results. Leila Ahir has dropped off. You're not too far from her in your riding. Are you surprised by the results, or is it pretty much what you've expected?
Oh, it was exactly what I expected. Cypress Medicine Hatters have been very engaged and they've been proactive, and they've been going out to the candidates' meetings as they've come through Medicine Hat. And Leila just didn't seem to share the values, support their ideas. A lot of us expected her to be the lowest and the first one to drop off. So thanks to Leela for good effort and hard work, but her ideas weren't selling with the UCP membership.
Sure. And Leela actually recently lost her board. Are you familiar with this story? At the UCP AGM in her riding, she lost her board. Are you aware of that happening? Maybe you can just tell our viewers a little bit about that and what the implications of that are.
Well, the implications are certainly we want to be grassroots. We want to have as much local engagement as we can. But your board is your local volunteers, your hardworking people, the people that help you develop your ideas and your grounding as to what's to do at certain times, your kitchen table cabinet. And the fact that she lost her board means that even in her local area, her support was waning, and it would have made it very, very hard for her. As a matter of fact, it may make it hard for her to win a nomination to actually just be the UCP candidate in the next election. And we'll see where that goes. There was times during the campaign as well where she shared some ideas that were considered conservative. At one point, her and Danielle Smith, the front runner, had a very public disagreement about things that were said and some labeling. And so, yeah, let's move on to making Alberta the freest and most prosperous place. The only way to do that is with true conservative ideas.
For sure. And speaking of those true conservative ideas, Drew, you and I have spoken a couple times about how property rights are very important to you. They're important to your constituents. They are needed for rural Albertans who need to be able to protect their land. I'm wondering if you're disappointed in the lack of discussion that we've seen in property rights throughout the leadership race.
Oh, more than disappointed. I was elected in 2012 with Danielle Smith and the Wild Rose. One of the main proponents at that time was a Property Rights Preservation Act and strengthening property rights to increase economic freedom, individual opportunity, and the values that are important. Jason Kenney even promised us a referendum to enshrine property rights in the Alberta part of the Canadian Constitution. He promised us a Property Rights Preservation Act, and so didn't deliver. There's thousands of people in this room tonight because Premier Kenney didn't meet expectations, and the fact that this leadership campaign missed that as well is very, very concerning. Property rights, although they're a bit out there in terms of how they affect your day-to-day life, they're how we build wealth. They're how we keep the government at bay. They're how we pass things on to the next generation. It's so time to get back to Alberta being the freest, most prosperous place.
Sure. And Drew, I guess sort of the elephant in the room is that you were kicked out of the UCP caucus at the same time as Todd Loewen, who is still an independent MLA, but he's now running for the leadership. So, they allowed him to run for the leadership despite having kicked him out of the party. Obviously, not the same people making those decisions, but it is sort of, an interesting tidbit. Now, I'm wondering, are you hopeful? Do you want to get back into the UCP caucus? And are you hopeful that you'll be able to after this leadership race?
Well, thanks for that. I'll start with, I polled my constituents, Cypress Medicine Hat, and about a third of them want me to stay as an independent. About a third of them want me to get back into the UCP caucus. But to me, what it's really about, Rachel, is as long as the new premier, which will be just an hour or two from now, is focused on smaller government, lower taxes, more economic freedom, and more individual opportunity, absolutely, I want to be part of that. Everybody's fearful of another Rachel Notley NDP government. And of course, the damage was severe the first time. Who knows what it would be the second time? But it's as important to work for our values of lower taxes, smaller governments, more family involvement, and more choice in health and education. I want a leader that will promote those for our Albertans, and I will absolutely support that within the UCP if that option is there.
Have you had any discussions with Danielle Smith about the possibility of rejoining her caucus? I mean, obviously, I'm sure it would come down to a caucus vote, but have you, mentioned your interest to the potential new leader?
Well, thank you for that. And again, I was elected with Danielle in 2012, and that was a good opportunity. And I've been talking to Danielle quite a bit, but I, for one, don't think it should come down to a caucus vote. Because let's be clear, when I was kicked out, Jason Kenney had his thumbs on the scales of that decision totally. It wasn't a secret ballot. Yeah, it was a caucus vote, but it was orchestrated by the leadership, and it wasn't a secret ballot. So why should I be subject to something else on the other way back in? And again, I've talked to a lot of my caucus colleagues, even here tonight. I have considerable support, and a lot of them are with me in the fact that I'm put in place by the people of Cypress Medicine Hat, the 50,000 people that pay me to speak for them and pay me to represent them. And if the people of Cypress Medicine Hat want me back in, I should be back in.
All right, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Drew. We appreciate your perspective tonight.
Thank you.
And just before we throw back to Andrew over at the studio, I just want to mention that Rajan Sawhney did have a little scrum a couple minutes ago, actually, before they gave the first ballot. She said she had no regrets about the way that she ran her campaign, and she was at peace with all those decisions. She also said something that I thought was very interesting. She said, "I will support the leader, whoever it is." Now, the reason I think that's interesting is because Rajan Sawhney had sort of positioned herself as a Danielle Smith attack dog throughout the campaign. She was very critical of Danielle Smith's Alberta Sovereignty Act, and during the first official UCP debate, she was going after Smith at every opportunity. Candidates sort of had the opportunity to pick which other opponent they wanted to spar off with. And, Rajan was consistently picking Danielle and sort of tearing her to pieces, and even made some really personal attacks like, Alberta doesn't need a talk show host. So I do think it's interesting that she's now saying she's willing to throw her hat behind the leader, and, could be a sign of things to come if Danielle does win the leadership tonight.
For that, Rachel, and thank you to Drew Barnes as well. I've had Drew on my show a number of times, so it's good to see they let him in the building, because when you get kicked out of your party's caucus, you never know if they're going to let you get around. But obviously, Todd Loewen has been allowed to run as a leadership candidate, and so far has outlasted Leela Ahir, a former Jason Kenney cabinet minister, which I think is quite significant. Now, I just want to give you a bit of a heads up here. We're about to go back to the results in a moment. The feed is going to kick back in just a couple of moments here. But I just want to point out, again, the numbers here, because the numbers are very important. Danielle Smith has 41.3% of the vote on the first ballot. We are going to be in this for at least 3 more rounds. And let me tell you how I know that, because the bottom tier candidates right now have very small numbers. Rajan Sawhney, 2.1%. Even if every one of her people put Danielle Smith as their number 2, Danielle Smith would still only be at 43.4%. And then Rebecca Schultz, same sort of thing. If every single one went for Danielle next, she'd be able to go. So the reason I think this is important is because the second ballot is not going to be enough. It can't be enough at this point to deliver a victory on this round to Danielle Smith or to anyone else. And this is something we just get from looking at the raw numbers. So we'll go back to the feed and get those numbers to find out what they are, though.
Our party. And even though we will be dropping one candidate off at a time, we cannot forget the contribution that they've made to this process. The 124,000 memberships that we have in our party is to a large extent because of the hard work of the candidates and the people that supported them. I now have the results for the second ballot. No candidate has received a majority of valid votes cast, so we will go to another ballot. Rajan Sawhney will drop off with 2.66%. Thank you, Rajan, for your hard work. Brian Jean, 11.25%. Todd Loewen, 7.71%. Rebecca Schultz, 7.32%. Danielle Smith, 41.41%. Travis Taves, 29.66%. So I will go back, we'll redistribute the second choice ballots of Rajan Sawhney's, and we will then be back with those results.
So as mentioned, just the math there, and I'm not a math person, but thankfully I can do the basic arithmetic, not always the complex stuff, but there just is not enough in that ballot pool to redistribute to get anyone, even Danielle Smith, who right now is in the lead, over that 50% threshold. But the round 2 results have Danielle Smith at 41.4%, Travis Taves at 29.7%, Brian Jean at 11.3%, Todd Lowen at 7.7%, followed by Rebecca Schultz at 7.3%, and Rajan Sani dropped off at 2.7%. Now, William, I want to get your take on the numbers here, and I want to talk about the redistribution. So Leela here, who was eliminated in the first round, had 1.6%. And if you look at how her votes were reallocated, Danielle Smith went up 0.1%. Travis Taves went up 0.3%. Brian Jean went up 0.3%. Todd Lowen stayed the same. Rebecca Schultz went up by 0.4%. And Rajan Sani went up by 0.6%, it looks like. So obviously, Leela tended to flow to Rajan more than anyone else. And we're talking about small numbers here, so I don't want to extrapolate too much. But it does seem like Danielle Smith, except for Todd Lowen, is benefiting the least so far from eliminations.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't necessarily think it would come as a huge surprise that if your first choice in this leadership race was Leela here, you probably didn't have Danielle Smith very high up on your ballot. What is interesting is I suspect a lot of people, or at least a not insignificant number of people, put no second choice. They voted for Leela and did not appear to have a second choice. That explains it to some degree why everyone's percentages also went up, because there are now fewer votes, total votes in the race. The two things, though, that leapt out at me were, first of all, Todd Lowen, who I think everybody kind of thought was, not going to be a major force in this. He ran, I think, a pretty good campaign and did a pretty good job in the debates that I'd seen. And I think his score is actually quite respectable. He came far ahead of two current or former cabinet ministers. And
he was before he was expelled, he was a backbencher, as I understand, correct?
I believe it's possible he may have had a position in caucus leadership to some degree, but don't quote me on that. I don't recall exactly. But no, he wasn't a minister in the Kenney government. The other thing that really leaps out, I think, has got to be a very disappointing evening for Brian Jean. This was someone who, on the last vote for leadership of the United Conservative Party, there were fewer candidates, but he had won in the 30s in terms of total support. And to see him, barely cracking that 10% threshold, I think is probably going to be quite disappointing for him and his team as the night goes on.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. And it's been weird. It's been a bit of a weird coalition. And we were talking about this, you and I, earlier, and also with Rachel. It hasn't exactly been the Kenney camp versus the anti-Kenney camp. Like, Brian Jean was a big critic, probably one of Jason Kenney's loudest critics for quite some time. But he also has tried to distinguish himself from Danielle Smith, who similarly has, I think, picked up a lot of the people that had a lot of angst about Jason Kenney. And I think this has been a little bit confusing. And arguably, this is the sort of situation without a ranked ballot that could have led to a significant vote split. But as you mentioned, there's been, it seems like, a relative collapse in Brian Jean's vote. Now, obviously, he may be the beneficiary of, some of Rajan Sani's down ballot support, or that of Rebecca Schultz, or even Todd Lowen. We don't know until that happens. But it is interesting for a guy that I think at one point saw himself as the heir apparent to the premiership of Alberta, and now he's in a not just third, but a very distant third on the leadership ballot.
Yeah, I will say that his decision to immediately quit as a MLA after Jason Kenney won the leadership race, I think was probably, in retrospect, not the greatest move, because he could have been, and I think would have been, a senior cabinet minister in a Jason Kenney government. And he would have had the ability to have a portfolio, to have consistent public profile. Instead, he's been away, and you would see the odd op-ed from him, but you really didn't hear and see from Brian Jean that much after he left. So I think probably in retrospect, him getting a little bit, I mean, I won't say he left in a huff, but he certainly left quite quickly after he didn't win the first leadership race. I suspect maybe not have been the best move, to win the leadership in the future.
We are waiting for third ballot results, but let's just go to Rachel Emmanuel in Calgary, who is right now with Conservative Member of Parliament Chris Warkentin.
Yeah, thanks very much, Andrew. I'm joined by Chris Warkentin, who is a Conservative Member for Parliament for Grande Prairie Mackenzie as well. He's also the campaign co-chair for Travis Toews. Thanks so much for joining us, Chris. We have some of the results so far. What do you make of them? Are they pretty much what you were expecting to see, or you've been surprised at all yet tonight?
You know, it really is a close race as we expected. Obviously, this is tighter than, of course, had been forecasted, and so, but it was very close to what we expected.
Do you think that Premier Jason Kenney wading into the leadership race had any impact on it?
Pardon me, I'm just not overhearing you here. Sorry about that.
Yeah, sorry. The feed has just started a little bit behind us. They're announcing the results right now. I think the feed is going to be a little bit delayed for them. I was just asking if you think, Premier Jason Kenney wading into the race and commenting on things like the Sovereignty Act, did that impact the outcome at all?
Well, I don't know. I didn't hear from anybody that really felt that it did. Obviously, there were many people that were commenting on the race, and I don't think that had significant impact on the intentions of people voting.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Chris. We're just going to throw to the stream now, but hopefully we can get you back a little later for some more time. Thanks. We'll throw it back to you, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Rachel and Chris Warkentin. And I should say, for those who aren't familiar, Chris Warkentin was one of the very instrumental figures in Alberta conservative politics who was driving the Unite the Right movement. He was touring Alberta alongside some other members of parliament and alongside surrogates for Jason Kenney. Jason Kenney himself trying to drum up support for Jason Kenney's PC leadership bid, which then became the merger votes in the PC and Wildrose parties, which then became the UCP leadership vote. So a lot of people forget all of the steps that Jason Kenney had to go through to get to the UCP. But we're getting third ballot results right now.
Todd Lawton has dropped off from the race, and the next choices on those ballots will be redistributed to the other candidates. Brian Jean, 12.07%. Rebecca Schultz, 8.02%. Danielle Smith, 41.70%. Todd Lawton, 30.41%. And Todd Lawton had 7.81%. So we will be back.
So that right there was a bit confusing. I think they flubbed the numbers there, but as I understand from looking at what Rachel has sent me here in writing, Danielle Smith still in first place at 41.7%. So again, just a 0.3% bump in the last round. Travis Toews, he is now at 30.4%, so he's gone up about 7 points, it looks like. Brian Jean, 12.1%, so he's gone up 0.8 points. And let's see, Todd Lawton now has dropped off the ballot. He had 7.7%, only went up to 7.8. So he's just shy of Rebecca Schultz, who is now in fourth place at 8%. So here's where it starts to get a bit interesting. Now, I should say, even if with 4 candidates left, Rebecca Schultz is eliminated and every one of her votes went to Danielle Smith, which is unlikely to happen, Danielle Smith would still be at 49.7%. So not yet at that 50% plus one threshold. So, William, I mean, this is going to be, it looks fairly decisive, but she's having to work for her victory if it goes the way we think it's going to go.
Yeah, and I think to be clear, though, the next round will see Todd Lawton's votes redistributed. So Rebecca will get.
Yeah, sorry, you're right. I was getting ahead of us here.
But that's interesting because I think we will expect to see Danielle actually get a sizable bump in the next round of redistribution. I think people who voted Todd Lawton 1 are very likely to have made it Danielle Smith number 2, and so that would take her not into winning territory, but if a majority of the votes did go to her, it puts her pretty close to it. She doesn't need that many more votes in order to go over the top. And so the question is now, assuming there isn't anything particularly crazy in the next round, and Rebecca Schultz is eliminated from the ballot, where do her second or third or fourth choices go? Like, where do the people who've had other candidates go? And I don't know. I think she's more than many of the others. She didn't go after Danielle Smith quite as hard as several of the other candidates did. She didn't join that group press conference attacking the Alberta Sovereignty Act. And so I don't really know. But assuming Danielle does pick up a majority of the votes from Todd Loewen, she is going to be pretty close on that next round. And it's possible we would see Rebecca's votes redistributed, and that would be enough to get her over the top.
Yeah, and thank you for correcting the numbers there. So the 7.8%, even if every single one of those went to Danielle Smith, she would be at, just to do the quick math here, 48.5%, I believe, 48.5%. So still we can't get 50% plus one. You're right, though. I mean, after that, it definitely does look like, it's all but certainly a Danielle Smith victory, but you still have to wonder how it's going to get there. And I wouldn't be surprised if even assuming Rebecca Schultz is the next one to go. I mean, something weird could happen, but even if that happens, it's possible that if a small share of Rebecca Schultz votes go to Danielle Smith, it could go to yet another ballot. So that'll be the thing to watch here. But I just want to kind of ask you a bit more broadly about your take on some of these players. I mean, Rebecca Schultz has always struck me as a team player. She's been a movement conservative. I've been on stage with her at Canada Strong and Free networking conferences in the past. So I think she's definitely going to be one that will happily support whoever the next leader is. Brian Jean is the one that I find quite interesting here, because he and Danielle Smith have both really tried to be and saw themselves as the alternate Kenney. So can those two work together in your view?
Well, I think it's a very interesting question. I would absolutely agree. Rebecca Schultz, I think she's done also well enough in this leadership race, improving her name recognition and her overall profile, that I would expect to see her in a senior cabinet position in, say, a Danielle Smith-led government. Certainly, I think if it's Travis Taves, we would expect the same thing. To have Rebecca Schultz there. Brian Jean, I don't know. I don't know what the personal dynamic is. Vitor talked a little bit about how the Danielle Smith team was a little bit cut off from some of the inter-campaign communications that have been going on. So I don't know. It will really be up to Brian if he decides if he wants to work and be part of it and stay as a UCP MLA. Of course, he's only been an MLA for quite a short period of time, having won a by-election. Or does he do what he did last time and he says, well, I'm gonna resign. I'm gonna wait a little bit and step down. I think if he were to do that second option, we would have a very hard time seeing him try and mount a third leadership campaign, because at some point it would become a bit of a game of Brian doesn't win, so he quits. And then a few years go by, back he comes, he doesn't win, so he quits. And I think that little routine might start to get very old for UCP members.
Let's bring Rachel Emmanuel into the discussion here now. She's been working furiously on the ground, bringing over pretty much anyone and everyone to the microphone there and interviewing them. And you've been doing a bang-up job, Rachel. But just in the lull here, has it seemed like everyone in the room, just from the shocks and gasps or lack thereof, that this is going pretty much how everyone thought, even if they were on different campaigns?
Yeah, well, I would say it's a little harder to get guests as the night goes on. I think people are drinking a little bit more and more, and people are less interested in coming on and giving their takes. But no, I don't think
they should be more interested in coming on when they're like 5 beers in. Come on.
You would think, yeah. No, I don't think people in the room have seemed very surprised yet. They've seemed, pretty excited with the results. People are cheering. You have to remember there's a lot of different people from a lot of the different campaigns here. So we're seeing a variety of perspectives. And they've just announced behind me now, as we sort of expected, Rebecca Schultz has dropped off the ballot and the rest of the candidates are remaining. So we still have a few rounds to go here. People in the room seem very energetic. They seem very excited about the results as they're coming in. And, I think the fact that it's getting down into the later ballot is making it more of an exciting race. So, Andrew, I'll throw back to you now, because I'm sure your stream's going to catch up soon, and you guys can throw back to the live stream as well.
Thanks very much for that. Certainly, we heard some raucous cheering there. We'll pick that up. The delay in the stream is, by the way, the United Conservative Party's stream. So I can tell you, we're giving you such a fast stream that Rachel Emmanuel can give you the results even before the UCP does, just with that delay. So I appreciate your patience there. We're going to go to that right now. But it sounds like, and I haven't seen the specific numbers, exactly like we thought was going to happen. Rebecca Schultz has now been dropped off the ballot, and we'll go to the feed now.
Ballot. Rebecca Schultz with 8.37% of the vote drops off the ballot. The remaining candidates' percentages are Brian Jean, 13.5%, Travis Taves, 31.92%, Danielle Smith, 46.21%.
So not really any surprise in these numbers, pretty much exactly like we were anticipating. This latest round, which had Todd Lowen's votes reallocated, puts Danielle Smith at 46.2%, Travis Taves at 31.9%, Brian Jean at 13.5%, and Rebecca Schultz at 8.4%. She's now been dropped off the ballot, and her votes will be reallocated in the fifth round. Now, just looking at this, the raw numbers here. So in the last round, Danielle Smith was at 35,095 votes. On this round, she's at 38,496 votes. So she went up from 41.7% to 46.2%. So she didn't get all of Todd Lowen's support. Todd Lowen had 6,500 votes. And as we see, Danielle Smith just went up by about roughly half that. So again, it's tough to say because you don't know why people vote certain ways and if ballots were spoiled. But it does seem like there were a lot of people that, were not willing to go to Danielle Smith, even if she was the most similar to Todd Lowen, who was their preferred candidate in this case.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I had wondered if, as the night went on, would we ever see any factor of anybody but Danielle? Because in the minds of some conservative voters, her decision to cross the floor, lead the Wild Rose floor crossing, and join the PC government of the late Jim Prentice, possibly some people see that as an unforgivable sin. And therefore, even if you like many of the things that she stands for, you like her Sovereignty Act, you like her take, be tough with Ottawa commentary, maybe there is that cohort of people who just say, I'm sorry, I cannot get over what happened way back in 2014, 2015. So that might explain it. I don't know. Certainly northern Alberta, northwestern Alberta is an interesting part of the province and doesn't always go exactly how you might think in nominations or in leadership votes. So we're definitely having an exciting night. That's for sure.
Yeah, and just to, again, crunch some of the numbers here. So 46.2% is what Danielle Smith is at now. She needs to get to 50% plus one. Rebecca Schultz at 8.4%. So if half of the voters, or I mean less than half, but if just under half of the voters for Rebecca Schultz have Danielle Smith as their next choice, she'll win on the next ballot. I guess the question I put to you, William, do you think that's going to happen? Because I didn't see, even if Rebecca Schultz didn't get in on the beat up of Danielle Smith, I don't see on the surface a lot of crossover between those two candidates.
Certainly, I think you're right. If Danielle is able to win on the next ballot, I suspect it won't be by a huge margin. I suspect that it will be a mathematical win, but it'll be a very narrow margin for her. The only thing I can think of is maybe going to influence the vote is she now is the only female candidate who is running still on the ballot. If you were voting a slate of candidates that was all female, then you would have to make Danielle Smith your next choice. So I have no idea if that is something that people do when they vote, but people vote for all sorts of reasons, and they're not always the logical or obvious ones that you might assume. So I do think it'll be interesting, but I think we're either going to see Danielle Smith come within a handful of percentage points of winning, or possibly even take it with a very razor thin margin on the next ballot.
Well, we're going to carry those results live as they come in. Rachel Emmanuel's in Calgary at UCP headquarters, and I understand now she's with Tarek El-Nega, who I've had on the show, and I've actually been on Tarek's horse before, which, come to think of it, might be animal cruelty.
Andrew, I just got to interrupt. We got more results.
Tarek El-Nega has done lots of great stuff in Alberta. Take it away, Rachel.
Sorry, they announced that the results were coming. We thought no candidate received a majority yet. I'm not sure if you guys can hear over there. We're going to another ballot. Brian Jean has dropped off from the race. We're just waiting for some more information here. I'll read it to you live as it comes.
Here are the percentages per candidate. Brian Jean had 14.83%.
So Brian Jean had 14.8%.
37.43%.
Travis Taves had 37.43%. And Danielle Smith with 47. I didn't catch the final percentages of that, but very close now. We should have the final results on the next round, obviously, but we're taking it to the very end here. So there's definitely a lot of excitement in the room for sure.
Thank you for that, Rachel. So we're going to get those numbers in writing here. And once the party feed catches up, we'll actually run that so you can hear it directly, and we'll get the graphic up on the screen there. But again, as William and I were just talking about, sounds like Danielle Smith did not get that margin she needed from Rebecca Schultz. Let's go to the feed.
Ballot votes cast, so we will go to another ballot. Brian Jean drops off from the race, and the next choices on those ballots will be distributed to the remaining two candidates. Here are the percentages per candidate. Brian Jean had 14.83%. Travis Taves, 37.43%. Danielle Smith, 47.73%. We'll be back in a minute.
Thank you very much. I feel bad. I don't know if we still have Tarek El-Nega. If we do have Tarek, let's get him back, please. Rachel, I feel so bad. Tarek was like, you need to get Tarek's rodeo rope and bring him back. That's how he would do it. So Tarek is great. I will just give a bit of an introduction because he's one of the most fascinating people in Alberta politics. He is from Dubai, and he went to the Calgary Stampede on vacation once and just fell in love with the West. So he sold his house in the United Arab Emirates, moved to Calgary and moved to Airdrie, I think, and got a truck and power tools and a cowboy hat, and now is like a professional on the rodeo circuit. And he gave me a tour of his acreage out there where he does the work with his horses. So Tarek is fantastic and has been a very strong voice for an independent Alberta. And I'm very curious, as you and I were discussing earlier, William, how many of those people Danielle Smith is able to bring back into the fold, assuming, she becomes the leader and we don't have just by some magical twist of fate, Jeb Bush on the 7th ballot or something like that. But the numbers here, it's great for suspense, but what do you make on the numbers here? What are their significance beyond just, how long it takes us to wrap up the show?
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting things. Danielle really only got a sizable bump from when Todd Loewen dropped off the ballot. Otherwise, all of her increases were pretty marginal throughout the thing. But obviously, in the last round, a large majority of Rebecca Schultz's second choices or later choices did go to Travis Taves, and that is reflected in the fact that he gained a very sizable chunk. That being said, he's at 37.4% and needs 50% plus one. There's 14.8% up for offer on Brian Jean. He would have to win almost all of it in order for him to beat Danielle Smith on the final ballot. I think I mean, it's not impossible, obviously, mathematically, but it would be extremely difficult for him to capture that large a share. I would say there's probably a decent argument that Brian Jean voters did rank Danielle Smith ahead of Travis Taves.
But you are right. If there is like an anti-Danielle Smith sentiment forming, that would be the path to victory. Now, I don't think that is going to be what happens, but we've always said it hasn't been a lock for Danielle Smith. Like in the federal one, it was a lock for Pierre Poilievre. In this case, I saw there was a path for Travis Taves. I think we do have Tarek El-Nega back with Rachel Emmanuel now.
Sorry about that, Tarek. So I was just in the middle of introducing him. Tarek El-Nega, he ran for the leadership of the Maverick Party. He also ran to be an MP for the Maverick Party in the last federal election. You were unsuccessful in both those bids, but I know that a lot of people wanted you to put your name forward for the UCP leadership contest. Right. Did you ever consider it?
It wasn't the right time. But what I'm really excited about is to see, the Maverick platform is all about pro-Western autonomy. And it's really exciting to see candidates that are pro-Alberta autonomy, predominantly Danielle Smith here, really pushing that Alberta sovereignty and that Alberta autonomy message. And I'll take it. That's good news for Alberta, for sure.
We've got two candidates left. It's between Danielle Smith and Travis Taves. If Taves win, do you think that he's been an Alberta sovereignty candidate, pro-Alberta, or you're not really getting that messaging from him?
Well, I think whoever wins it now realizes that half the base, give or take, is pro-sovereignty and pro the Sovereignty Act. So you're going to need to bring them in. So if Danielle's not the one that wins and Travis Taves wins, then he's going to have to bring that in. It's a pretty divided party, not dissimilar to how it was a 50-50 split with Kenney. So it's time to unify that party and not discount the sovereignty movement of the party.
Sure. So you're mentioning, the party, people who are running, they're kind of realizing that this is something that's important for the base. I mentioned a bunch of people wanted you to run, which shows that it is important for the base. People wanted you to run. You decided against that. Do you have any interest in running for a UCP nomination at any point? You're going to step back from politics for the time being? You
know what? I'm not going to close the door to running again. Right now, I've got a vested interest on making sure the NDP loses. So that's where I'm at. So whether Danielle wins or Travis wins, I want to see the NDP lose. There's no room for socialism in this province or in my life. And that's what I'm focused on. Whether I personally run or not, I'm not going to close the door on that.
You mentioned that you want to make sure the NDP loses. We're talking a little bit about, I'm sorry. We have the results again. At least we got a couple minutes this time. All right. Thanks very much. Yeah. Take care.
Absolutely. Yeah, you bet.
All right. That was Tarek. We have some more results. So I'm going to go to live. It's Danielle Smith. She's the premier. And the crowd goes wild behind me. You can hear the excitement in the room. Danielle Smith has won with 53.77% of the vote. Travis Taves has come in second with 46.23% of the vote. And you can just hear the excitement in the room. It came all the way down to the end, but Danielle Smith was able to pull a victory off at the end. The question now will be whether the fact that she waited so long, she didn't get that first ballot victory as many of us expected. She didn't get that victory later to the end. Will that impact her ability to unite the caucus going forward? And I'm sure your stream is just about up now, so I'll throw back to you, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. We will go to that feed when it comes in, but Danielle Smith has won the UCP leadership race, will be the next premier. And it sounds like from the raw numbers there that roughly half of Brian Jean's votes went to Danielle Smith and roughly half went to Travis Taves. And as William and I were saying, it would have needed to be much more lopsided than that. Here are the official numbers.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have the results of the sixth ballot. Our members have elected a new leader. Please welcome the next premier of our province, Danielle Smith.
I'm back. Well, if you're wondering why I wasn't nervous tonight, I must thank Layla Fool, whose grandma's watching from the Good Fish Reserve, and she gave me these peace beads at the very beginning of the evening, and Layla, they worked. So thank you so much for your support. I appreciate it. And you should also know the family connection that we have with our returning officer. Rick Orman was the very first campaign that I worked on in 1992 when he was running for leadership of the Progressive Conservative Party. And the reason I supported him is because he and my dad played football together at Crescent Heights. And Dad is here this evening as well, Rick, if you want to go over and say hello. So I'm just so delighted that our big conservative family is all together in one room, united and strong. My fellow Albertans, over the last 117 years, we have written a remarkable story together. It's a story of pioneers and farmers, entrepreneurs and innovators, communities and families. A place where the best and brightest come from every corner of this world to join with us in building one of the greatest places on earth to live, to work, and to raise our families. Tonight marks the beginning of a new chapter in the Alberta story. It is time for Alberta to take its place as a senior partner in building a strong and unified Canada. No longer will Alberta ask permission from Ottawa to be prosperous and free. We will not have our voices silenced and censored. We will not be told what we must put in our bodies in order to work or to travel. We will not have our resources landlocked or our energy phased out of existence by virtue signaling prime ministers. Albertans, not Ottawa, will chart our own destiny on our own terms, and we will work with our fellow Canadians to build the most free and prosperous country on earth. Before speaking further, I wanted to just thank first and foremost my husband, David. It's funny, when I started running again, somebody asked me if I'd gotten divorced, because David's standard answer when anyone asked me if I was getting in politics again was, yeah, she's welcome to get back into politics with her new husband. He still loves me after all this. Imagine that. My wonderful parents, Doug and Sharon, are here this evening, as my uncle Blaine and my brother Doug and his wife Carrie. I'm delighted to have my family with me. But I do also want to congratulate and thank my fellow leadership candidates, not only for their commitment to the party, but also to democracy. Over the last several months, these great men and women have placed their lives on hold and sacrificed greatly because they love this province with all their hearts. They want to see our province move forward with strength and prosperity as much as anyone in Alberta. I want to thank Travis Taves for his integrity and for leading the charge in bringing our province's budget back to surplus from the brink of disaster under Rachel Notley's NDP. Alberta and our caucus are going to lean heavily on your strength and experience in the months and years ahead. I also want to thank Brian Jean for his passion and commitment to the grassroots and to making life more affordable for millions of Albertans suffering from the inflation crisis brought on by the NDP Liberal coalition in Ottawa. Thank you. And on a personal note, I want to thank Brian for showing leadership after I made a mistake in judgment in 2014. Learning from your example has prepared me for today, and this party will always owe you a debt of gratitude as one of the founders of this united Conservative Party. Thank you, Brian. I also want to recognize Rebecca Schultz for her compassion, class, and innovative ideas. Rebecca, you are one of the brightest lights in our province, and I can't wait to work with you to ensure so many of those great ideas become a reality. To Todd Lowen. Thank you so much for reminding us that MLAs are the voice of the people in government, not the government's mouthpiece to the people. And I look forward to working with you to ensure caucus lives by that principle moving forward. And on that note, I understand that over this last week, Todd, your fellow UCP MLAs indicated overwhelmingly in favor of you to rejoin the UCP caucus. And I invite you to attend our caucus meeting tomorrow morning so we can get back to work. So thanks so much and welcome back, Todd. I also want to thank Rajan Sani for her class and commitment to vulnerable and senior Albertans. And I look forward to advancing those causes together, Rajan. And to Leela here, thank you for your passion and commitment to serving Albertans, even if that means fighting a cowboy who's fallen off a bull. Or fighting a bull is to save a fallen cowboy. Thanks, Leela. I want to thank each and every one of you who ran. You're all great Albertans, and I look forward to serving alongside you. I would be remiss as well if I did not thank my friend, Premier Jason Kenney. Let us remember that Premier Kenney has fought for Albertans for decades, first as an advocate for taxpayers, then as one of the most effective and influential Conservative cabinet ministers in Canadian history, then leading the charge on unifying the Conservative movement, running and beating Rachel Notley's NDP, and then governing as Premier for one of the most tumultuous times in Alberta history. Although we may have had our differences these last couple of years on a couple of matters of policy, I want him to know that I admire and respect him. Thank you, Jason, for being such a loyal Canadian and a giant in the Conservative movement. Thank you, Premier. And a special thanks to my campaign team, who dedicated the last few months of their lives to helping us get to this moment. I simply wouldn't be here without you. And I should name just a few: the leadership of Matt Altheim, my campaign manager from Edmonton. Yeah, you'll be happy to know he knows how to beat NDP in their own backyard. That's why we got him on our team. And Rob Anderson, who's been such a great support for me over the years, an incredible policy advisor. Thank you. And also the other team, I have to tell you, one of my campaign members would always introduce our team saying, we've got an LPN, an electrician, at-home moms, a single mom, a PhD, and a yak farmer. And that is no joke. Every campaign needs a yak farmer. And finally, thank you to our almost 125,000 UCP members and the thousands of volunteers from every campaign in all corners of our province. Thank you for loving and serving our province. Thank you for the hours spent fighting for your party, your candidate, and for the values that they represent. If there's one thing I've learned about Albertans, is that we don't expect our leaders to be perfect, but we do expect them to stay humble, admit when they're wrong, and to learn from their mistakes. I love that about our province, and I'm grateful to have earned this second chance from you. I will never forget it, and I pledge to you tonight, I will not let you down. My friends, tonight I invite all United Conservative Party supporters, our party, our caucus, fellow leadership candidates, all of us, regardless of who we supported during this leadership race, to come together and unite for the good of our great province. Albertans want us to be unified. They want us to succeed. Albertans don't want to elect a socialist NDP government any more than they want to see the Toronto Maple Leafs win the Stanley Cup. Sorry, honey. David's a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. However, my friends, Albertans will no longer tolerate infighting and disunity. They rightly expect their provincial Conservative Party to be competent, cooperative, and unified against the constant threat posed to our economy by the NDP Liberal coalition in Ottawa. Unity is not a talking point. It is an action. It is something you practice rather than preach. Now is not the time for settling old scores or rivalries. It's not the time to punish our fellow Conservatives for past mistakes. This is why, as Premier and leader of this party, I am wiping the slate clean. The membership has spoken. They have given us direction on how they want us to stand up to Ottawa and protect our freedoms, and we will follow our members' direction on this without delay. However, every single UCP MLA, regardless of who they supported or what they have said or what decisions they have made in the past, good or bad, is not important at this moment. All that matters now is that what we do to serve Albertans from this day forward. And I want to invite each of our MLAs, our members, our volunteers, our supporters, every single one of you to join me to govern with strength and compassion, to protect our fellow Albertans from the NDP Liberal coalition in Ottawa, and to lead this party to a resounding victory against the NDP in 2023. To win in 2023, we need to focus on the issues Albertans are most concerned with. As you know, Canada and Alberta are in the midst of an inflation and affordability crisis that has been primarily caused by the fiscally destructive policies of the NDP coalition with the Liberals in Ottawa. When you flood the money supply with hundreds of billions in new spending and pursue policies that spike the price of energy and transportation, the result is crippling inflation that is hurting a sizable majority of Albertans. The 30-year-old university graduate living in her parents' basement because she can't afford the damage deposit on a rental. The single mom who has to resort to smaller and less nutritious meals for her young son and daughter because she can't make the budget stretch any further. The working father forced to take extra shifts and overtime because if he doesn't, he won't be able to pay for the extra interest being charged on the family's mortgage from repeated interest rate hikes. And the senior living on a fixed income, anxious about how they're going to afford to pay for their needed prescriptions when their power and heating bills increase this coming winter. These are not uncommon stories. They are not exceptions to the rule. I've been speaking with hundreds of these Albertans for months. Albertans and all Canadians are suffering terribly every day at the hands of an inflation and affordability crisis. And that is why I find it so callous that in the middle of this crisis, the NDP Liberal coalition in Ottawa just decided to triple the carbon tax. This will only make energy and groceries and food and fuel and housing more expensive, everything we need to live. And I find it incomprehensible that Rachel Notley has so far refused to call on her federal NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh, to lobby his taxing cohort, Justin Trudeau, to reverse that terrible decision hurting Alberta families. There is no excuse for any party leader seeking to be Premier of Alberta to sacrifice the welfare of Albertans for the sake of towing the line of her federal party. It is time for Ms. Notley to put the welfare of Albertans above the anti-Alberta policies of her federal NDP leader. She is not putting Alberta first, and that's the difference between us. I will always, always put Albertans first. No apologies. Clearly, Albertans want nothing to do with the Notley-Singh-Trudeau alliance of economic destruction. But to earn the trust of Albertans, we need to do more than just stand up to the NDP Liberal coalition. We must do more than be the party of economic growth and balanced budgets and debt reduction and lower taxes. That's just part of who we are as a party and as a government. But we also need to show Albertans that we can be trusted to compassionately care for our vulnerable and our seniors, especially in this time of crippling inflation. We need to reform the dysfunction of Alberta Health Services and repair our broken EMS services with swift, decisive action. That also means repairing our relationship with nurses and doctors. It means replacing managers with frontline staff. It means attracting additional health professionals from around the world. And it means that as Premier, When I direct AHS management to double ICU capacity by a specific date and give them the resources to do so, that direction is followed immediately. And if they can't do that, then we will find others who can do it for them. Although we will always balance the budget and control increases in spending, we must also demonstrate the compassion Albertans expect of us by ensuring the vulnerable can afford the necessities of life during this inflationary crisis. We must ensure our teachers, our children have the teachers and education assistants and tutors that they need to succeed, especially after the disruption to education over the last couple of years. We must address the mental health and opioid crisis that is stealing our young people from us. And we must give a hand up, a warm hug, real hope, and real help to those on our streets who don't know where else to turn. We are Albertans. Yes, we are entrepreneurs and business people and fiscally prudent, but we also have heart and compassion that matches the size of our mountains. Our generous compassion is the very soul of Alberta. And Albertans demand a government that reflects that compassion, especially in times like these. As Premier, I will ensure we act swiftly to demonstrate exactly that. Now, friends, in the months ahead, we must recognize that there are those in Ottawa and the establishment, even some in Alberta, that don't want to see our party be unified. They don't want us to succeed. And sadly, these folks will do and say almost anything to keep us from succeeding. They will dredge up old statements and mistakes from the past. They will use cancel culture and fear-mongering in an attempt to scare and dissuade Albertans from supporting our MLAs and me. For example, it is safe to say that many in the Notley Singh Trudeau alliance will claim that my plan to stand up to Ottawa with the Sovereignty Act is somehow meant to move Alberta toward leaving our beloved Canada. That is a lie. What Albertans want is for our province and all provinces to have our rights under the Constitution of Canada protected and respected by an increasingly hostile Ottawa regime that seeks to control every aspect of our lives. From healthcare to education to free speech to delivery of our social programs, they want to control it all because that makes it easier for them to impose their agenda on Albertans and on Canadians. That is not the way to unify a country or secure prosperity. That is a road to division and economic ruin, which is why, in closing tonight, I want to speak to our fellow Canadians. Albertans love Canada. It is our country, our home. All we want is to live, grow, and prosper in the manner that we choose. We want to set our own course, develop our resources and economy, and run our social programs and society as we think best. We also want to share our prosperity with the entire country. So tonight, I invite every Canadian to partner with us, partner with Alberta. Let's work together to build the strong, prosperous, and unified Canada that we know that we can be. A Canada where provinces work together and empower one another to reach our unique individual goals and aspirations. A Canada that celebrates our great diversity of opinion and thought, rather than one that demonizes and sanctions one another for expression and speech deemed unacceptable by woke politicians in Ottawa. A Canada that respects all of our citizens, regardless of their religious, cultural, or political beliefs. Together, we can be the solution to the world's energy crisis and wrestle away the leverage that thug dictators are using against an energy-starved Europe. Together, we can be the energy superpower that provides billions of people in Africa and in Asia with the clean LNG needed to replace their reliance on coal, wood, and other high-emission fuel sources, saving billions of tons of emissions and replacing them with billions of dollars for our citizens and our economy and our social programs. We can become the nation that develops the breakthrough technologies that make continued fossil fuel use not only possible, but preferable for fueling the energy needs of this generation and the next. And we can feed the planet with our world-class food producers and technologies. We can build the most innovative, entrepreneurial, and well-educated workforce in the developed world, where students are taught to create and build and innovate rather than to conform, obey, and profess allegiance to failed and outdated ideologies. Alberta wants to play a central role in building that Canada with you as an equal partner. And I invite you and those you elect to join us in building the most prosperous and free country on earth. My friends, tomorrow I'm going to be meeting with our MLAs, and we will discuss unity and how to best meet the massive responsibility in front of us. And like you, we will all be returning home to celebrate Thanksgiving, to give thanks for our families and loved ones that for too long were kept apart, to give thanks for our freedoms and the opportunities ahead, and to give thanks for our great province, her wide open spaces, pristine landscapes, and amazing people. And after Thanksgiving, next Tuesday, I will travel to our capital city to be sworn in as the next Premier of Alberta. And I can't wait to get started. Thank you, and may God keep our land glorious and free.
That is Alberta's Premier designate, Danielle Smith, now the leader of the United Conservative Party. As she just said at the end there, as of Tuesday, she will be the Premier of Alberta, getting sworn in at the Alberta Legislature in Edmonton on Tuesday, although getting right to business, meeting with caucus tomorrow. And before I bring my colleague William McBeath back in, I want to just point out the breaking news that came out of this is that she has extended the hand to Todd Lawton, the expelled former UCP MLA and her competitor in this race, and said, come on back tomorrow morning. And that's, I think, a very big step, not necessarily a surprising one, but I think a very important one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you listen to large sections of her speech, she went out of her way to talk about her fellow candidates and laud the work they had done. And that, of course, is very important when you're trying to put together a sometimes fractious group of MLAs and leadership candidates who didn't win, who won't be getting sworn in as Premier on Tuesday. So I definitely think she said a lot of very interesting things in her speech. It's pretty clear what her key talking points are going to be: the freest, most prosperous place in the world. But I would say you also heard her talk about a lot of things that maybe people wouldn't have assumed or associated with Danielle Smith. Things like caring for the less fortunate, for our seniors, or people who are having trouble buying food or medication or paying for their heat. So I think you will see a kinder, gentler Danielle Smith on the domestic front, even as she maintains a fairly aggressive posture against Ottawa.
Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable analysis. And I want to bring in Rachel Emmanuel, our Alberta reporter, who's been doing some tremendous work on the ground in Calgary and gave you the leadership results even before the UCP feed did. She's that quick. She's like faster than the internet, which is fantastic. So, although not saying much sometimes if you're a customer of some companies. But in any case, Rachel, let's talk a little bit about your sense overall now. Not a huge surprise in terms of the results. In fact, even when you were talking to people from other campaigns, there seemed to be an understanding earlier on that this was headed towards a Danielle Smith victory. But someone who's been following her campaign in Alberta politics, when you heard her speech, what was your take on it? Anything that you were surprised that she included in there, or anything noteworthy that maybe you weren't surprised by, but you think it's something that people need to pay attention to?
I think she came out really strong in her speech just now. We heard a lot of the points that she's been making throughout the campaign. I think I noted in my coverage of it in my written article that she really started this crusade against, COVID-19 and against some of the policies that we've seen regarding COVID-19 she started that when she was on the radio during her sort of exodus from politics, if you will. She was really pushing back on a lot of the government narrative on COVID-19. She interviewed Jason Kenney at some points and disagreed with some of his decisions, including decisions like to imprison pastors. And we saw a lot of those early conversations that she had translate itself into the UCP leadership race, into her policy in the leadership race, and when a lot of the policies that she put forward. And I think that's, to her credit, one of the reasons she was able to set herself apart from the other candidates, because some of the candidates that were with Kenney when those decisions were made, understandably probably didn't feel comfortable making those decisions because they would have looked rather silly given their record being in the Kenney government. And I think now, during her final speeches, we just saw a stronger version of that. She came out and she reiterated a lot of the points that she made during the campaign. And she just was really solidified her promises to protect people's ability to put what they want to in their bodies. And again, to fight back from Ottawa. She, of course, has positioned herself as someone who will go toe-to-toe to Ottawa if she won the premiership. Now she has, and she's made it very clear that that will be a number one priority for her from the get-go, and that's been evidenced by her promise to make the Alberta Sovereignty Act to be her first piece of legislation when she's in government. So I thought we heard a lot of things here from her speech today that she's been saying the last couple of weeks, at many campaign events that I've been to. I see similar messaging from her since I started covering her campaign in the early days of May.
Before I ask you another question there, Rachel, Justin Trudeau has just tweeted, "I would like to congratulate Danielle Smith on becoming the next Premier of Alberta. Let's work together to build a better future for Albertans by delivering concrete results, making life more affordable, creating good jobs, and more." So we'll see if the pleasantries last to their first meeting. One thing that has come up here is that she does not have a seat. She is not an MLA. She's the only candidate in the race who's not an MLA. She was going to be running for a seat, although now that she's the leader, she signaled that she has a couple of MLAs that have offered to step down so that she can run immediately in a by-election and have several months in the legislature before the next election. Do we know yet where she will be running?
She has not announced yet where she's going to be running, but as you mentioned, some MLAs have offered to step down for her. That being said, there are a few MLAs who have already stepped down and their seats will become available. So I think we're probably going to see Smith running in one of those ridings fairly soon. So I don't think she's going to be waiting until general election. I think she wants to get into the legislature as soon as possible. And I've heard some speculation about ridings that she's going to be running in, but nothing confirmed yet. So I won't give those reports, quite yet, but I can assure you that I will let the people know as soon as I get them confirmed in the coming days.
Well, I know everyone is celebrating there, so I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Any closing thoughts for this evening, Rachel?
I think it's been an interesting race. I think Vitor's comments were sort of right on the mark that at the end there, it really could have been anyone's to take. I don't think Danielle had the victory by such a wide margin as I was maybe personally expecting based on some of the crowd sizes that I've seen at campaign events for Smith compared to some of the other campaign events that I see. But, the question has really been circulating is one of unity. Will Danielle Smith be able to unify the caucus going forward? And now that question is even more prominent considering that it took her all the way to the final ballot to pull off that victory. So I'm curious to see what's going to happen in the days to come. I was looking forward to maybe a little bit of a rest. It's been a long UCP leadership race since May. Been covering it for a long time, but I suspect that there will be plenty more to cover in the days to come. I don't think that rest is going to be coming anytime soon.
Well, I think you probably deserve a bit of a break as well, but I'll let you get back to the festivities. Fantastic work tonight. Rachel Emmanuel, Alberta reporter for True North. Thank you and have a good night.
Thank you.
And just heading back to my colleague, William McBeath, here in these closing couple of moments. William, any thoughts that you have burning that you'd like to share just before we say farewell?
I would say she's already sort of anticipated where she expects to be attacked. And I think she expects those attacks to come pretty fast and furious over the coming weeks. She's talked about how they're going to pull statements she's made out of context. They're going to find old things she's written. Of course, she was an editorial writer for quite a while.
And a talk radio host.
She's espoused a lot of opinions. And whereas I don't think her opponents really made use of a lot of that material, I don't expect the New Democrats to pull their punches. So I think she's already telegraphing to Albertans, look, you're going to hear some things that maybe don't rub you the right way, but we're not going to let it throw us off our game. We're not going to give in to cancel culture. We're not going to apologize every single time somebody makes an outrageous claim against me. So I think that'll be an interesting thing to watch over the coming weeks.
Yeah, and I will say, not to belabor the point, but it is, I think, important to note here that she was a pariah when the whole issue happened with the floor crossing. She lost a nomination. When she started in talk radio, I said earlier, she was really hated by a lot of people. And I liked how she approached that with such humility in her speech. She thanked Brian Jean for building the party, for building the Wild Rose Party in her absence, and then for becoming part of the solution and founding that united Conservative Party. And she, I thought, very humbly said thank you to Albertans for giving her a second chance. And I think that's very important because that really, of all the criticisms I heard about her in this particular race, that was not one of them. That people honestly did seem to move on from that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, which is truly remarkable. I mean, I had worked for Danielle and left right before that floor crossing happened. It turned out to be
well, that's awfully convenient.
Very good timing. But, I had met with her a few days after that had happened. And, to me, I couldn't think of someone in politics who had been more hated by her own party, by Albertans in general. And they felt very hurt and personally betrayed by her actions. So the fact that she's recovered from that is really remarkable. It also shows Albertans are forgiving, that we will let you come back from a big mistake as long as you say, I'm sorry and I messed up. And I think, Jason Kenney probably needed to take that lesson a little bit more to heart. And we may not have had this leadership race if he had said a couple more times, I goofed or I made a mistake and I'm very sorry.
Yeah, very much so. And again, I know that this sometimes puts me offside with our audience, but I have had a number of very cordial exchanges over the course of Jason Kenney's political career on the radio, off the radio, on the podcast, off the podcast. And I think he has been a net positive figure for the Conservative movement. So I do humbly say thank you to Jason Kenney for your service. And obviously it's a period of transition, and Danielle Smith is the new UCP leader, and as of Tuesday will be the premier. But I can't get in on the complete obliteration of Jason Kenney's legacy, despite my frustrations in the last couple of years. I always feel the need to clarify that because I find often it becomes a bit too tribal on that. But we will certainly cover the race. I've known Danielle for many years, but at True North, we will do the work that is needed and cover things that matter to people on the right in a way that the mainstream media simply doesn't. We'll ask them questions about things that actually matter, not about, why aren't they quadrupling or quadrupling the carbon tax or something, which I think is the first question that she'll get from CBC at her inaugural press conference. But if you want to support the work we're doing at True North, please do head over to donate.tnc.news, donate.tnc.news. We are a national publication, but we pay attention to Alberta, we pay attention to the West, and we pay attention to the moving and shaking of the Conservative world, and that includes covering the UCP, the CPC, the PPC, the Wild Rose Independence Party, and also Justin Trudeau. We cover him a fair bit as well, so fear not, but we don't get the poutines, which I think is important. So donate.tnc.news is how you can contribute to that. And I want to give a big thank you to all of you for tuning into the show tonight. And thank you for your patience through the early tech glitches, but we got through those in the first few moments. Thank you to Rachel Emmanuel and the team in Calgary, notably Sean, and also to those on the back end here, Harrison and Andrew and Noah, and of course, William, for your contributions today. Thanks to everyone for all your help. Have a great evening. God bless you.